I lost everything. My house, my car, my life savings, gone. How could this happen? Where did it all go wrong? Could gambling references in video games lead to kids developing gambling addictions down the road? It seems some would say yes, which is why the game corner in Pokemon has closed down for good. Gambling was a minor mechanic that appeared in every early Pokemon game, but its removal didn't happen as a result of wanting to shake up the gameplay. This mechanic was removed for a different reason: regulations. Was this the right decision? Did removing the game corner mess up a beloved aspect of Pokemon? Let's explore the history of gambling in Pokemon and figure out if the series is better off having removed slot machines. The removal of this mechanic started in Generation 4. In South Korea, there were no slot machines starting in Pokemon Diamond and Pearl. Then, when Pokemon Platinum came out, the game corner was then also removed in Europe, since there were changes made to Europe's game rating system that labeled gambling references as 18+. Then, in Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver, the slot machines were removed everywhere except for Japan. From Generation 5 onward, there have been no slot machines in any Pokemon game. Since I'm not European, the first I noticed of the removal of the game corner was when I played Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver, which replaced the slot machines with a game called Voltorb Flip, a game that 11-year-old me did not understand the rules of. Now, the game corner was removed because of a changing cultural perception of gambling in video games. I am not a fan of gambling. I think a lot of real-life gambling is extremely exploitative to people with neurological disorders, those with mental health problems, and the elderly. I think an important distinction between the real-life gambling I dislike and the gambling we see in video games like Pokémon is that none of these games encourage their player to bet real money. It seems these guidelines come from a concern that gambling simulation in kids' games could lead to a desire to try the real thing when those kids grow up. Not super easy to tell if this would really be the case. Makes me think of that whole video games cause violence, ban Grand Theft Auto thing. There might be a little more nuance and research on this subject, so let me know in the comments if there's anything I missed. Gambling is even treated negatively in Pokemon. You actually have to get a little PSA before you can even gamble in the original Pokemon Red and Blue. No, seriously, in order to bet on the slots, you have to get a coin case to hold on to your coins. And the only way to get it is to talk to this guy here. And what does he say? He says he lost all his money at the slots. He's warning you about the dangers of gambling. There's a bunch of other NPCs that also speak ill of the practice, saying that the game corner is corrupting their town. The game corner is even owned by Team Rocket, you know, the villains. So no, I don't think they should remove the game corner just because it references gambling. Not everything in media aimed at all ages has to be completely sanitized. Gambling exists. It's a part of this world. With all that being said, I'm glad they removed the game corner, because it was a boring and luck-based mechanic that kept the player from getting content in the game. So now that we've got all the discussion about the morality of gambling out of the way, let's actually discuss gameplay and take a look at all of the different game corners across the first 4 generations of Pokemon. In Pokemon Red and Blue, the game corner had you buy coins and then put them in the slot machine, and maybe you'll get more coins. That's about it. It's really dumb if you think about it. Getting more coins either means spending more money, or it's just a war of attrition where you press A until you get more coins. The game corner basically works the same way in each subsequent appearance, except for Heart Gold and Soul Silver, but we'll get to that. Now, the biggest issue I have with the original game corner is that Pokémon are hidden behind it. Porygon is an exclusive Pokemon only available as a game corner prize. Scyther, Pinsir, and Dratini are also good prizes because you can get them before Badge 4 instead of after Pokemon Tower. Now, I think other methods of getting Pokemon besides finding them in regular grass is great. The problem is that these Pokemon aren't fun to get. They either make you broke or you waste hours trying your luck on slot machines. That's not good and engaging gameplay. Pokemon Gold, Silver, and Crystal, and the remakes of Gen 1, Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green, have essentially the same sort of game corner, where Pokemon are hidden as prizes. There is one difference in Gen 2. There's this little card game where you can place bets on what Pokemon is behind the card. It's still as luck-based as the slots, but a nice piece of variety nonetheless. Ruby and Sapphire has the same slot machines, but stopped with giving Pokemon as prizes. The prizes are essentially some good TMs and the dolls of the starters. It's annoying these good TMs are locked behind this. Personally, I prefer the Gen 5 change of unlimited TMs, so the fact that you can only use one Ice Beam that's so hard to get your hands on is a bit frustrating. Hoenn also added a roulette wheel with the slot machines. I like the Pokemon icons of the roulette wheel, but it's just as annoyingly luck-based as the slots. Overall, the Hoenn Game Corner is both better and worse because it has less remarkable prizes, i.e. it got rid of Pokemon as prizes. Sure, that's better because you can just ignore the Game Corner and still catch them all. But it's also worse because, well, there's no good prizes. You may as well just get rid of the Game Corner at this point, which, well, they did. In Sinnoh, the Game Corner is back to only being slot machines. They tried to do this fun thing with the bottom screen in the Clefairy. Apparently Clefairy is there to help mitigate the luck problem because you can press A where Clefairy is pointing and make sure you get a certain part of the slots. At that point it just becomes a timing thing, which isn't too fun either. Similar to Hoenn, there aren't Pokemon prizes anymore, so I find myself skipping this one as well. I think by now the developers were aware that some countries weren't going to allow gambling, so they minimized the use of the Game Corner so those regions without it wouldn't miss out on any extra content. In Heart Gold and Soul Silver, they kept the Game Corner in the Japanese version, but all other versions got Voltorb Flip. Voltorb Flip is basically Minesweeper. You have a board of face-down cards, and you can see the number of points that appear in each row going up and going side to side. You can also see the amount of Voltorbs that are in each row. If you flip a Voltorb, you lose. So basically, you want to flip all the non-Voltorb tiles. There is one major flaw with Voltorb Flip, and it's that the only way to get coins is to play the game. You can't buy coins, so if you want any of the prizes, you have to play Voltorb Flip for it. And Heart Gold and Soul Silver is another game that hides Pokemon behind coins. The most notable Game Corner exclusive Pokemon in these games is Dratini, which you could receive before the third badge. Voltorb Flip is fun for about 10 minutes, and even the lowest priced prizes would absolutely take longer than that to win. How would I improve the Game Corner? First off, remove slot machines or roulette. I mean, now we're legally obligated to, but I would have removed them anyway. You don't want to have too much of your game relying on luck. Luck only really works in tandem with skill. Looking at you, Chance Time in Mario Party. God, I hate Chance Time. The Game Corner doesn't have to be casino games. It could be repurposed into an arcade. I don't know why they didn't just do this afterward. It seemed like Voltorb Flip was moving us in that direction. But you know what really should have replaced the Game Corner? Pokémon Pinball. I suppose this couldn't have happened back in Gen 1, or in Gen 3 because Pokémon Pinball was its own separate game and was able to be marketed as such. But clearly Game Freak doesn't see a market for Pokémon Pinball as its own game anymore. So why not have it be a part of the Game Corner? Should these buildings really sit empty when there's an excellent alternative that's been ignored for nearly 20 years? The Game Corner is definitely not the biggest part of Pokemon. It had a lot of significance in the first generation because it was the location of Team Rocket's hideout, but in each subsequent release it was acknowledged less and less until it was ultimately removed entirely. I don't miss the Game Corner in future games that don't have it, and was actively annoyed by it when I replay games that lock Pokemon away behind it. If there's anything we've truly lost from gambling restrictions in kids' games, it's Casino Luigi. I'll miss that dapper guy.
A video game based on a trading card game is a strange concept. The whole appeal of cards to me is that they are a real object that I can hold in my hand. When you put the cards in a virtual world, I feel disconnected from them. I'll never feel the same way about a list of cards on a screen than I would about my real binder full of treasure. Yet, Pokémon trading card game for the Game Boy and its sequel, well, the fan translation of that sequel, are games I find myself coming back to from time to time. The reason I revisit this game is because while I have binders and binders of these cards, the amount of times I have actually played a real-life card match are few and far between. It just isn't easy to cobble together 60 real-life cards into a usable deck against another 60 real-life cards. With a video game, it's much easier to just pick it up and start a card battle without too much hassle. In Pokémon trading card game for the Game Boy, the collecting of the cards takes a back seat while the actual matches are put put to the forefront. Now, there's going to be a new virtual card experience, but it seems that it's going to be focused far more on the collecting aspect. Not much has been revealed about Pokémon trading card game Pocket, but I can already see some massive red flags. So join me as we reflect on the original Pokémon trading card game for the Game Boy and ask ourselves if this mobile game is really the best direction for these virtual trading cards. Let's begin by talking about Pokémon trading card game Pocket. The trailer opens on a guy drinking milk for some reason, and his phone dings to let him know that he's got a pack. We then see some different openings of different Pokémon cards. While some of the artworks of these cards resembles real cards, these are not the same cards from sets that we can collect in the real world. Let's take a look at this Cubone here. It uses the same artwork as the Cubone from Forbidden Light, but it is in fact not the same card. The already released version of the card has the attack Burdensome Bone, which does 40 damage, whereas the other Cubone has the attack Growl. That doesn't do any damage at all, and has some effect that I currently can't read. The most notable difference is that these cards lack resistances. They only have weaknesses and retreat costs. These cards are also dealing in much smaller numbers than the power creep monstrosities we know of today. Of the cards we see in the trailer, Charizard EX has the largest HP at 180. Compare that to the current Charizard EX released in Pokemon Card 151, which has 330 HP. It is not known if these cards will only exist in a virtual world or if there's going to be physical cards printed alongside them. Since these cards do not fit in with the current meta and mostly reuse artworks of already established cards, I am going to guess that these cards are virtual only. So now that we're familiar with the cards we're going to be using in this game, what do we do with these cards? Beyond opening packs, you can also trade and battle other players. The trading feature may not be available at launch, so I guess we can remove the T from TCG until that update drops. There are also quick battles, as it puts it. It seems these battles follow the same TCG rules that we know and love. There are standard energy costs, and it's confirmed that there will be at least supporter cards, which implies that there will be other trainer cards too. What is not yet known is if these decks will be your standard 60-card decks, or if one of the win conditions will be to take 6 prize cards like in the regular game. Since in the announcement you see 2 players in different places, one in a car and the other at a park, this confirms that you can play against people even if you aren't in the same place. I'm curious to know if the game allows you to battle random people online, or if it even has some CPU trainers that you can go against as well. So how do you get cards in this new game? You're allowed to open 2 packs a day at no cost. The way this is worded makes me think that there may be a way to open more packs a day, and it may or may not involve a cost of some sort. I want to give the game the benefit of the doubt here because I have not yet seen their pricing on this, and to be fair, they did completely avoid microtransactions in Pokemon TCG Live, a decision that I am thankful for. 2 packs a day does not sound like a lot, but that really depends on how many cards there are total within the game. How many days will it take for you to put together a proper deck, and how many more days will it take to put together a really good deck? There are also immersive cards, which are special cards that show you a whole little painting within the card itself. They're cool for sure, but I think the presence of this and the fact that it was so highlighted in the trailer says that this app is not going to be too deep gameplay-wise, and this feature is meant to make it seem like it's more than it is. We don't know that for sure. For all I know, this game could be really dense, and this is nothing more than a bonus feature. Now let's compare Pokemon Trading Card Game Pocket to Pokemon Trading Card Game for the Game Boy. Here's how Pokemon Trading Card Game works. The game has the first 3 original sets, Base Set, Jungle, and Fossil, with some other extra cards thrown in here and there. With these cards, you craft a 60-card deck and go up against other NPCs within the game. The goal of the game is to defeat all of the Pokemon clubs, each based around a certain type, and challenge the Pokemon Card Masters. In this game, you don't have access to every card right out of the gate. In fact, you have access to very few cards when you begin. You can choose a starter deck based on one of the 3 starters, which includes just enough cards to hold your own against some of the lower level trainers. There is one main way to obtain cards in the game, which is through defeating NPCs. If you want certain Pokemon cards, you have to go up against RNG and dueling the same characters over and over again. To make this worse, the cards are not divided into base set, jungle, and fossil like they are in the real world. Instead, the cards are split evenly between 4 sets: Colosseum, Evolution, Mystery, and Laboratory. This was likely because base set is much larger than jungle and fossil, while the 4 sets in this game all have nearly the same numbers of cards. The problem with these sets not being the same as their real-world counterparts is that you don't know which cards you may be getting from them. With the internet, this is no longer a problem. You can just look them up on Bulbapedia. But remember, this game was released in the 90s, and I bet a lot of kids in the 90s were annoyed that they couldn't just whip out their card list that came with the starter decks to figure out what cards they could get. Once you do figure out which set has good cards like Hitmonchan or Bill, you'll then begin the process of grinding out matches until you get the cards you need. For some of the more common cards like trainers, you'll eventually get them at a leisurely pace. But if the card you want is a rare and you need 4 of them, you're gonna have a rough time going up against these Pokemon card underlings over and over again. What would have improved this immensely was if the game offered a fuller map and gave the player more interesting ways to get themselves more cards. Maybe it could have even left out a lot or all of the RNG elements, but maybe that would make it too alien from trading card games, which do revolve around gambling for your favorite card. The main appeal I find in playing this game is experiencing the meta of Gen 1 Pokemon cards. I wasn't around in the 90s, so I never got the chance to go to tournaments when these cards were all the rage. And I think that's really the value in this game. The preservation of a card game, which, if you were to properly play today, would require you to play with and possibly damage expensive, now vintage cards. That preservation only applies to Generation 1, because they never made another Pokemon trading card game. The main reason I think the Game Boy version is better is because it offers a sense of progression in gaining cards and going up against increasingly difficult NPCs. We know for sure that the progression of obtaining cards in Pokemon Trading Card Game Pocket will come with daily pack openings, and possibly microtransactions. While I think I can find enjoyment in getting new cards each day, I much prefer the concept of gaining more cards through game progression. What we don't know for sure is if the game will include NPCs that increase in difficulty. If the entire game revolves around battling other random trainers around the world, then honestly, there is really no point in getting this game. You'll just get cooked in every battle by people who waited for, or paid for, the highest quality cards and built the best decks. I have that same problem in Pokemon TCG Live, which gives you good cards at a snail's pace, meaning that you'll always find yourself at a disadvantage against players who have more free time or more money to buy code cards. Here's what Pokemon really needs: 2 distinct kinds of Pokemon trading card game video games, and neither of them should be Pokemon Trading Card Game Pocket or Pokemon Trading Card Game Live. The first kind of Pokemon Trading Card Game should be a straight-up simulator of every card in existence so players can try out every deck against every other deck. It should be a game that you pay for with money, you know, like a normal game. The Pokemon Trading Card Game Simulator that I mentioned already exists in a fan-made capacity, so Pokemon is just leaving money on the table by not making an official one. I really don't see the point of all the code cards and opening packs online. Okay, there's some enjoyment in building up a virtual collection, and the kind of game I'm suggesting would put the kibosh on that. That's why this Pokemon Trading Card Game Simulator I'm suggesting should exist in tandem with another game, a Pokemon Trading Card Game Adventure, where you travel through a region building up a card collection and battling your way through increasingly difficult NPCs. I do see that there are a lot of positives in having a simple Pokemon trading card game on my phone. Maybe Pokemon Trading Card Game Pocket will be an amazing time. Maybe it will have NPCs and a solid sense of progression. Maybe it won't have any microtransactions and will just tell you to wait until tomorrow, you little gambling addict. Even in the best case scenario with this game, it tells us this: Pokemon is not interested in giving us real access to all of the cards they have, and they are not interested in preserving the metagames of their old cards. I'm glad the fans are going to pick up the slack on that, but should we really have to? What were they thinking when they implemented the luxury ball in Pokemon Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald? For the average player, you will find one luxury ball throughout your entire journey through Hoenn. There are other places to find them, but they are few and far between. The problem with the scarcity of this Pokeball is that it is only as strong as a regular Pokeball. You know, that thing that Wurmples will sometimes break out of? I had the misfortune of having my luxury ball break the first time I played Emerald. I was young, didn't know how rare they were, and didn't save before using it. This was only a problem in Generation 3, as in Generation 4 you can finally purchase a luxury ball in shops. The luxury ball's rarity in Generation 3 always baffled me, but I think I may have realized the real reason why Game Freak designed it this way, and I actually think there's something really magical about the luxury ball. I've even come up with an insane challenge that will boggle the mind of even the most patient shiny hunter. I call it the Luxury Ball Challenge. In order to understand the extent of the Luxury Ball Challenge, let's start at the beginning. How do we get the Luxury Ball? So, what's so special about the Luxury Ball? Generation 3 introduced many new Pokeballs, and all the new Pokeballs can be bought at certain shops around the Hoenn region, all except two, the Premier Ball and the Luxury Ball. The Premier Ball is given out if you buy 10 regular Pokeballs at once, so it's easily obtainable in larger quantities. The Luxury Ball, on the other hand, has very few ways of being obtained in Generation 3, as it's not sold in any shops. You find one luxury ball on the ground of the abandoned ship, which is a location that is already a little off the regular beaten path of the game. However, there are some other ways to get the luxury ball in Gen 3, all of which far more difficult. A repeatable way of obtaining a luxury ball is to win a Master Rank contest. If you've already received a Master Rank ribbon and win a contest with that same Pokemon, you will be rewarded a luxury ball instead of another ribbon. I could make an entire video on the deep mechanics of Pokemon contests, but to avoid a massive tangent, I'll just say it takes a lot of time and effort to get a Pokemon to this point. Once you've done the work in the contest hall to get a Pokemon to the state where it consistently wins a Master Rank contest, you'll be able to get luxury balls relatively quickly. It's still by far the hardest Pokeball to obtain a lot of, besides the Master Ball, of course, as even this method revolves around grinding and grinding away. Another way to obtain luxury balls is through someone called the Lily Cove City Quiz Lady, who I did not know existed until I looked up luxury ball methods of acquisition on Bulbapedia. So apparently in the Lily Cove City Pokemon Center, there are one of 3 ladies who spawn depending on the last digit of your trainer ID. The Quiz Lady asks you one of 16 random questions, giving you a 1 in 16 chance of getting the quiz you want. The Quiz Lady will almost never actually give you the luxury ball because she only asks one of the questions, and if you don't get the luxury ball one, you're out of luck. I don't know why Game Freak even implemented this nonsense. There's also this other strange way to possibly receive a luxury ball in Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green. This character, named Lady Selfie, is lost in a cave, and if you find her, she asks for a Pokemon to see. Show it to her, and she will give you a luxury ball. Maybe. There's actually a 30% chance she won't even give you a luxury ball. Also, in Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness, there's one luxury ball on the ground of the shipwrecked SS Libra. This is similar to its appearance in Hoenn, as it just appears on the ground of the ship and you only get one. So let's say you go through a lot of time and effort and maybe get yourself a few luxury balls. Now what? What does the luxury ball even do, and why is it so exclusive? The Luxury Ball is the only Pokeball in Gen 3 that affects a Pokemon after it is captured. Any Pokemon that resides in a Luxury Ball will have its friendship grow twice as fast. While this can be a useful effect, it is not so useful that it warrants the insane rarity of this item. Friendship does a few things gameplay-wise, but the main 2 things it does is raise the power of the attack Return and cause some Pokemon to evolve. As for the move Return, there's actually a lot of Pokemon that can benefit from that, which does make them good luxury ball candidates. When a Pokemon has maximum friendship, Return is a 102 power normal type move, around on par with Earthquake. There are also many Pokemon that evolve based on friendship. There is only one friendship evolution Pokemon that can be caught in the luxury ball: Golbat. Golbat is a great team member, and Golbats appear in some of the later game caves after you get the luxury ball. An average player could save and soft reset to try their one luxury ball on a Golbat that will then evolve much faster. Every other friendship evolution is a gift Pokemon or exclusive to breeding, and thus can only be obtained in Pokéballs. There is one exception, sort of. Chansey. But not in Fire Red and Leaf Green. Chansey in that game can only be caught in a Safari Ball. You can catch a Chansey in a Luxury Ball in Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness on the Sitdark Isle. There's a trainer there that has a Shadow Chansey, and you can snag it from him. So, that's all the Luxury Ball can do gameplay-wise. Make it a little easier to get full power on one attack, and make it easier to evolve two Pokemon, one of which is extremely obscure. But maybe it's not about what the Luxury Ball does. Maybe it's about what it is. It's no secret that Pokemon loves the idea of having super rare, but ultimately meaningless little details. I mean, look at how many people will spend hours or even days of their lives shiny hunting. I think the Luxury Ball was originally meant to be like that. A crazy, rare little holy grail for you to show off to your friends. After all, the item is treated as this high-class object, being found on nice ships, given as a gift from the contest hall, and from a lady who literally has her Pokemon hold gold nuggets. Like, gold nuggets don't even do anything when your Pokemon hold them. This lady is just flaunting her wealth at any trainer who happens to know the attack thief. So, Game Freak, let's take your challenge to the fullest. What is the most challenging Pokemon to capture in the elusive Luxury Ball? Statistically speaking, the hardest Pokemon to get in a Luxury Ball would be just about any shiny legendary Pokemon. Catching a legendary Pokemon in a Pokeball is no small achievement, but catching a shiny legendary Pokemon in the rarest Pokeball, which is just as unlikely to catch as a standard Pokeball, is a, no pun intended, legendary achievement. The legendary Pokemon I want to challenge you with catching is the elusive Black Rayquaza. Not just because it would be extremely difficult, but because of the color coordination. So, what would it take to get yourself a shiny Rayquaza in a Luxury Ball? First off, you're gonna want to get as many Luxury Balls as possible. I would ignore Kanto's and XD's Luxury Balls unless you already got them in those games, as they will be far too much effort to get compared to just farming the contest hall until you get yourself enough Luxury Balls for the job. So, how many Luxury Balls will that be? I'd say you only need about 100 Luxury Balls, maybe 150 to be on the safe side. So, get ready to take part in a lot of contests. Most likely, Rayquaza isn't gonna struggle knock itself out. Your biggest fear is Outrage Confusion. After Rayquaza uses Outrage 2 or 3 times in a row, it will become confused and may damage itself. Because of this, you never want to put Rayquaza in red health, since the confusion damage is enough to knock it out at that range. You'll want it to be asleep for as long as possible. My first thought was to use Spore Breloom. While that seems like a great way to put Rayquaza to sleep, don't forget about Effect Spore, which possibly will inflict poison. Your best bet is a nice bulky Snorlax with Yawn. In fact, just get a team of level 100 Snorlaxes and yawn away. Attach leftovers for some self-healing, and you'll be able to throw tons of balls at Rayquaza. Weakening is too risky because of critical hits and possible confusion damage. You want to just brute force Luxury Balls at the sleeping giant until one finally works. The Snorlax strategy is the one I think will work best, but let me know in the comments if you've got a better strategy. I like thinking of challenges like these because I personally would never do them. What? You think I actually found a shiny Rayquaza to get footage for this video? How much free time do you think I have? I used a Game Shark code. If I attempted this, I would have to quit making videos and just dedicate my life to getting this Rayquaza. So I'm going to have to bow out of the challenge in hopes that another classy trainer will take up the mantle. If there are any shiny hunters out there that actually succeed in getting the fanciest Rayquaza ever, please send me the video. You'll truly go down as the John D. Rockefeller of Pokemon trainers. And once you do, make sure to have your Rayquaza hold a gold nugget so you can show Lady Selfie that there's an even higher class trainer out there. Filmmaking is an aspiration so universal even elemental monsters want to break into the industry. And in Pokemon Black and White 2, that dream comes true with a piece of side content that allows you to star in movies with Pokemon. This interesting game mode is hindered by slow, unskippable cutscenes and its tendency to make players start all over the slightest mistake. This is probably why Pokestar Studios remains largely forgotten in the grand scale of things. The most discussion I've seen about Pokestar Studios revolves around its unique non-Pokemon you can fight, such as Mecha Tyranitar, Big Blimp, and Feet. But there's so much more to Pokestar Studios than just fighting this weird thing. Pokestar Studios is really something to behold, with just the sheer amount of things that go on here that you won't find anywhere else in the Pokemon universe. I have come up with some possible improvements that could have turned Pokestar Studios into an amazing game mode. In order to understand how this piece of side content could have reached its full potential, let's start at the bottom and see how you can make it in Pokéwood. Pokestar Studios is first introduced through a side quest in the early game of Pokemon Black and White 2. Shortly after getting your first badge, you arrive at Verbank City, where you encounter the second gym leader, Roxy, having a conversation with her father, the ship captain. This ship captain says he dreams of making it big at Pokestar Studios. After defeating Roxy and obtaining your second gym badge, you'll want to make your way to Castelia City across the ocean to continue your Pokemon journey. But wait, the ship captain is off making movies. So you instead follow a talent scout to Pokestar Studios so you can watch Roxy's dad's debut film. When you head inside the theater, you see this cinematic battle between Riolu Man and Bryson Man. You might recognize Bryson Man because he's the original Pokemon Black and White's 7th gym leader. Looks like he's given up on guarding his gym in order to pursue acting. Good for him. The ship captain's movie is received quite poorly by the audience. They even fall asleep halfway through. This is because the hero in this movie loses the battle, and the bad guy is like, "Wahaha, I win." This is because in Pokestar Studios, you fight a Pokemon battle, and if your Pokemon faints, the movie ends and is received poorly by the audience, most of the time. Some scripts actually make it so that you're supposed to have your Pokemon faint, but, it depends on the script. In this particular script, the Pokemon was supposed to win, but the ship captain's Pokemon lost. I guess he's a bad actor and a bad Pokemon trainer. When you get out of the ship captain's movie, he's all like, "Well, I'm no good at this. Time to give up and go back to my day job." Which, good for us because we get to progress through the game, but I feel like we just saw this dude abandon his dreams. Anyway, once the ship captain realizes he's a hack, it's time for you to make your own movie. Basically, the game has you make the good version of the bad movie you just saw. So, how do we go about making the movie? Filming a movie in Pokestar Studios is much like participating in a Pokemon battle. Most of the time, you don't use your own Pokemon, and instead use rental Pokemon. Eventually, you can make your own Pokemon a star, but more on that later. When you enter the green screen battlefield, you're encouraged to take a look at your script, which is located in the scenario section on the menu. The scenario provides information about the battle, including your opponent's full team and moves, and a script giving you hints on what to do. It doesn't specifically say what attacks to use, instead telling you to use a super effective move on your opponent. If you're new to the franchise, this could help new players learn type matchups. The tutorial movie is quite simple. The battle should take 2 turns, which are called scenes here. where you take out each of Bryce and Man's Pokémon in one shot with each of the super effective moves provided to you. At one point, a dialogue option is presented to you when you are threatened by your foe. Your response options are, "Bring it on," and "I'm scared." The tutorial dialogue is made intentionally obvious, but later on it will become more difficult to know which dialogue option is right for your particular film. So those are the main things you do in Pokéstar Studios. Battle and choose dialogue options. It doesn't seem like a lot with this first little battle, but is there more to this when we move on to more advanced films? After the tutorial, the films get more complicated. While the more advanced films try to make the battles more interesting, in practice they only serve to make the battles take longer and become more tedious. All of these movies just boil down to follow the script and use certain attacks at the right time. You don't make your own unique choices, you don't come up with a unique strategy, it's nothing more than a glorified cutscene that you have to watch twice. Once in green screen mode, and once with the special effects added. Remember all the cool special Pokémon I mentioned earlier? Well, they only look like that in the second cutscene, where you are just watching the Pokémon do what you already commanded them to do. When you actually feel like you're in battle, the opponent is just a green slab. Get used to fighting these. There's a lot of them. There's a little bit of novelty in seeing what you just filmed become fully realized with all the special effects, especially when one of the Pokéstar exclusive Pokémon appear. It's exciting. It kind of gives the feeling like you made a real movie and now you're seeing the final product. But it's just not enough. Oh yeah, that reminds me. The movie is an unskippable cutscene. You have to watch the whole thing in order to see how well you did. Pokémon games don't have the most compelling writing in the world, and Pokéstar Studios was clearly a little bit of an afterthought by the game writing team. Pokémon Black and White and Black and White 2 are considered the best in the series writing-wise, but when people talk about that, they are more so talking about the actual game story. The reason I feel connected to the characters of these games is that they exist within an overall story that I'm playing through. These Pokéstar Studio movie scripts are disconnected from that story. They don't matter outside of the few minutes they exist on screen, and even when they are on screen, they're fine. The movies themselves follow pretty simple tropes like stop action monster or scary ghost. You've seen one, you've seen them all. The only movies I really enjoyed writing-wise were the romance movies that told a love story through a Pokémon battle. My favorite was this scenario where a Smeargle is annoyed at its trainer for purposefully losing the battle because she thinks her opponent is cute. The most frustrating part of Pokéstar Studios are the things out of your control that make you start over. One such example of this is the botched execution of the dialogue options. You'd think that adding these dialogue options would allow you to shape the narrative, but when the dialogue is presented to you, there is a right and wrong answer. The director will hint to you that you chose the wrong dialogue options with remarks like, "What was that?" and "That line is like toast without jam," which is the most passive-aggressive shit I've ever heard. If you choose the wrong dialogue option, you might as well just start the entire movie over and choose the right one. This either becomes a game of just looking up the right answer or straight up trial and error. And if you don't pick the correct one and hear that director go, I don't like that, you have to restart and go through all the dialogue and battle up to that point again. That is, unless you want to release a box office bomb. If your movie bombs at the box office, you can always film it again and re-release it. Imagine if Hollywood actually worked that way. Like, oh no, your movie didn't turn out, well, why don't you try again? There's one other thing that can ruin your movies: RNG. Pokéstar Studios curbs some RNG by removing the standard damage rolls, so it's easier to calculate the potential damage your Pokémon do. However, there are chances for stuff like critical hits and added effects like confusion and paralysis. This is annoying because you can lose the movie based on luck alone. While it is true you can also lose a regular battle through luck alone, a skilled trainer can design their team to play around things like critical hits and added effects. Pokéstar Studios, for the most part, has you use rental Pokémon, so you can't play around these unexpected events by planning ahead. For example, this shoot right here was against this green screen thingy that knew Spark, and it paralyzed me through pure luck. I was supposed to knock it out next turn, but the speed reduction from paralysis caused my opponent to attack first and knock me out. So I had to play the entire battle all over again, hoping that it wouldn't happen again. Only for that exact thing to happen again. Hollywood is eating me alive.
There is one aspect of Pokestar Studios that does shake up the gameplay: the potential for strange endings. Usually, if you go off script, it just results in a failed movie. But sometimes, if you go off script in the correct way, you get a strange ending, which surprises the audience and subverts their expectations. Most of these strange endings involve either letting the turns run out without knocking out your opponent when you were supposed to knock them out, or to knock out your opponent when you aren't supposed to knock them out. I criticized the writing of these movies earlier, but the strange endings do offer some pretty good writing just because they're so wacky. One strange ending I got involved a movie where my character uses a clang to fight a simulated alien ship built by a scientist to help fight against real aliens. In the scenario, you're supposed to use lock-on and then zap cannon to practice. However, Clang also has the attack Gear Grind. If you use that attack to end the battle, in the actual movie the dialogue mentions that you destroyed the scientist's creation, and now she's going to make you pay for it. There are also hidden scenes that come from using certain moves at certain times. You'll have to bring your own Pokemon with the specific move in order to get the hidden scene. I don't know how you would ever know about these without using something like Bulbapedia. Maybe there are hints somewhere? Or you're supposed to just know? So that's how you make movies using the basic mechanics and rental Pokemon. But what if I want my own Pokemon to be a star? Pokestar Studios lets you use your own Pokemon as long as you've already done a successful version of that same movie. So by the time you get to use your own Pokemon in the movie, you have already watched through it twice, meaning that if you go through it again with your own Pokemon, you have gone through the same narrative 4 times. If you use a Pokemon in a film, it will now have a little star pop out of it when you send it in a battle afterwards. This shows other trainers that your Pokemon is truly a star. If you happen to have a shiny Rayquaza captured in a luxury ball holding a nugget, and if you've seen one of my other videos, you would know how hard it is to get a hold of that. You could transfer that to your copy of Black or White 2 and make the fanciest Pokemon in the world a movie star. Or if you think that's too much effort, just check out my video on capturing shiny Rayquaza in a luxury ball. Most of the time, your own Pokemon won't be compatible with the script because the rental Pokemon had certain moves that you would need to have on your own Pokemon in order to shoot the movie properly. Your Pokemon will also probably be extremely overleveled and knock out the opponent too fast. The whole appeal of Pokestar Studios, being putting your own Pokemon on the big screen, just falls flat. The problem with rental Pokemon is that you feel no connection to them because they're not your Pokemon. One of the strongest aspects of the Pokemon franchise is the personal connection that the player is made to feel with their virtual monsters. What makes a good piece of side content in Pokemon is how it further nurtures your relationship with your Pokemon. Pokemon contests, the Pokéathlon, the bug catching contest, and of course the Battle Frontier all require the player to use their Pokemon differently than they do in the regular game, which gives us a new way to interact with our Pokemon and with the game itself. The only exception I can think of to this is the Battle Factory, which relies entirely on rental Pokemon. However, the Battle Factory succeeds because it steers into using rental Pokemon as its main gimmick, while Pokestar Studios seems to use rental Pokemon because it kinda doesn't know how to make itself work without them. So how do we fix this rental Pokemon problem? How do we make Pokestar Studios about making movies with your Pokemon? In order to fix it, we're gonna have to, as they do often in the film industry, do a little reboot. The Pokestar Studios reboot is my idea for how Pokestar Studios could have been improved if it were implemented again in the franchise. The first major change in the reboot: no more rental Pokemon. All the Pokestar Studios Pokemon have to be captured by you, the trainer, and made to work within the possible movies you make. The game would require you to use certain Pokemon for certain movies. For example, the Giant Monster film uses Tyranitar and Slowbro in order to craft a narrative where a super strong kaiju-like Pokemon
faces off against a defensive Pokémon with good healing capabilities. The objective of the film is to stall out Tyranitar's attacks for 4 turns. If this film were done with my system of using your own Pokémon, you would be required to bring a Kaiju Pokémon of your own. Not only would Tyranitar be eligible, but Pokémon like Gyarados and Hydreigon would be as well. For the other slot, you can bring any Pokémon, but the gameplay encourages you to bring something defensive, because if this Pokémon faints, or if it knocks out the Kaiju, you fail the movie. Levels would be changed in Pokéstar Studios, much like how everyone in the Battle Frontier is automatically level 50. Instead of just being level 50, the Pokémon's levels would be changed to fit the movies. For example, the Giant Monster movie puts a level 60 attacker against a level 52 defender, and my version of it would keep those levels regardless of the actual levels of those Pokémon in-game. Now, the outcome of this would still be the same movies, but because the player had to go out of their way to capture both these Pokémon and teach them specific moves, they would feel more attached to their movie stars. Also, Pokéstar Studios The Reboot would bring back the 5 contest stats. For those that don't know, in Generations 3 and 4, there was a piece of side content called Pokémon Contest, where instead of the elemental types, all attacks were given one of the 5 personality types: cool, cute, tough, smart, and beauty. Pokémon themselves can also gain skills in these stats through cooking berries that correspond to the different personality types. For Pokéstar Studios, different movies would have different outcomes depending on what kind of personality type Pokémon and type attacks you use. Now, one issue that may come with this is that the battles take into account the elemental type of the move, such as fire or water, in order to damage the opponent. Pokémon Contest ignored the elemental types entirely to focus on the personality types. If personality types were added to Pokéstar Studios, the player would have to keep track of both the elemental type and the personality type of each attack, which could get confusing. So, would adding personality types in tandem with elemental types be too much for a piece of side content? Unfortunately, I think it would be. But what if it weren't just a piece of side content? What if Pokéstar Studios came back as its own game? That's right. If there are any execs from Game Freak watching my channel, think of this as my pitch for Pokéstar Studios, the game. In the full game, you would transfer Pokémon from your main games into Pokéstar Studios to star in movies. Since it's a full game, there would be so many movies to choose from, you probably will already have Pokémon that fit some of the scripts. In the age of social media, I think a game revolving around Pokéstar Studios would be perfect. It's a great way to bring Pokéstar Studios out from obscurity and save the Poké film industry. The Pokéwalker was an accessory included with copies of Pokémon Heart Gold and Soul Silver. It's a pedometer that tracks your steps in real life in order to obtain items and Pokémon. It was actually the world's most accurate pedometer at the time of its release, showing us that Pokémon professors truly are the greatest innovators of our time. In order to use the Pokéwalker, the player transfers one of their own Pokémon into the device to, as the game puts it, go for a stroll. But once you see the step requirements for some of the Pokémon you can catch with this thing, it's really more like a Forrest Gump trek around the country. Before you send over your Pokémon, you have to choose your Pokéwalker course. Each course has its own set of Pokémon and items. For every 20 steps you take in the real world, you are awarded a Watt, the universal currency of the Pokéwalker. 3 Watts allow you to look for items, and 10 Watts allows you to try and catch a Pokémon. When you return from a stroll, the leftover Watts can unlock new courses once you get enough of them. There are 6 Pokémon per Pokéwalker course, each in a group of increasing rarity. Only 3 of the 6 Pokémon can appear per trip, randomly selected from the 2 Pokémon of each group. In the Pokéradar minigame, 4 grass patches appear, and eventually an explanation point will pop up on one of them. As you press on the explanation, it will either start the battle or another one will appear. The more explanation points appear, the rarer your encounter will be. No matter the Pokémon you find, the battle is always the same. You both have 4 hit points, and the lower your opponent's hit points, the more likely you'll capture them. Pressing left attacks, pressing right evades, and pressing the middle throws a Pokéball. If you attack, the opponent will either attack back or evade. If they evade, you don't hit them and they hit you back. Ouch. You may be thinking, why not evade all the time? When you do evade, the Pokemon has a chance to flee. Also, there are critical hits that deal 2 damage, so you've got some more luck to deal with. Pokéwalker battles are actually really exciting and are the perfect balance of luck and player choice. To create this feeling with 3 buttons and minimal computing power is just a work of art. So, what sort of Pokemon can you get on the Pokéwalker? You've got your regular Pokemon that you can get anywhere else, like Pidgey, Geodude, or Tentacool. There's some more uncommon Pokemon like Voltorb, Murkrow, or Magby, and even rare Pokemon like Dratini, Wobbuffet, and Kangaskhan. Now, in order to find rarer Pokemon in the higher groups, you not only need to have enough watts to try and catch them, but you also have to have a certain amount of steps logged into your Pokéwalker before they reset for the day. For example, a Wobbuffet doesn't appear until you've taken 4,000 steps, while a Paras on the same course will start showing up at around 700 steps. You can lower the amount of steps you need for a certain Pokemon if you bring one of the 3 special types for that particular course. So now that we know how to find Pokemon, let's take the Pokéwalker to the absolute extreme! What are the rarest Pokéwalker Pokémon? As of Gen 4, the rarest Pokémon around aren't Mewtwo, Rayquaza, or Arceus. It was Evil Face, Hungry Bear, and Ugly Fish. The rarity of these Pokémon in the regular games is a subject for another video, but let's just say that each of them take a ridiculous amount of time and effort to get a hold of. The other methods of getting these Pokémon are so insane that the 100,000 watts needed to unlock the final Pokéwalker course seems like a better alternative. That's 2 million steps, by the way, and that doesn't include the watts you use to try and catch Pokemon or nab items. And to make matters worse, all 3 of these Pokemon have a lower than usual chance to encounter. So you'll be trying even longer to get these guys. Feebas is the easiest to get of the 3, which is nice because it's arguably the hardest to get of the 3 under non-Pokéwalker circumstances. After 500 steps, you may find Feebas at a 20% encounter rate, which is lower than most others, but not too bad. Spiritomb and Munchlax, on the other hand, are far more difficult to get your hands on. They require 7,500 steps in one day, that is, if you have a Dark, Psychic, or Ghost Pokemon in the Pokéwalker with you. If not, it's 10,000 steps to find one. Once you've put your legs through that anguish, you can then go up against the 15% chance of getting Munchlax, or the 5% chance of getting Spiritomb. Yep, 5%. To make matters worse, if you already got Munchlax and want Spiritomb, you'll have to take 7,500 steps just to check if Spiritomb is even the one to spawn, since only Munchlax or Spiritomb can appear, but not both. So, if you take all those steps and Spiritomb doesn't spawn, you're gonna need to take another brisk walk tomorrow once those steps reset. If you think you'll have enough time to just put the Pokemon back and try again for Spiritomb on the same day, remember, this is a 5% encounter rate and 10 watts a pop to try. And when you do encounter it, you're not even guaranteed to get it. That is, on average, 200 watts per encounter. Let's say you catch it on attempt 4, a generous assumption. That's 800 watts, 16,000 steps. So it doesn't even matter if the steps reset, because you need to take that many more to even have a chance of getting the thing. But at least Spiritomb is the hardest Pokemon to get, right? Oh, there are worse ones. Did you know that the Pokéwalker was the first time you could capture a wild starter Pokemon in a repeatable fashion? It's Torchic in the Sightseeing Pokéwalker course. Torchic has a lot of similarities to Spiritomb. They both take 7,500 steps in order to be able to be seen, provided you bring the special types. The major difference is that Torchic is a 1% encounter rate instead of Spiritomb's 5%. Well, 1% isn't that much lower than 5%, right? Says the person who fell asleep in 7th grade math and doesn't know what exponential growth is. If Torchic is encountered 1% of the time, that means that you will find, on average, 1 if you use 1,000 watts. That's 20,000 steps for 1 encounter. And you probably won't even catch it the first time. By your 3rd Torchic attempt, you will have walked the equivalent of the New York Marathon. Also, Torchic's course was a special event course, only available if you lived in Japan from November 14th, 2009 to January 11th, 2010, or if you lived in South Korea between April 17th, 2010 and May 31st, 2010. But that's got to be the hardest Pokéwalker Pokémon, right? What could be worse than 1%? Pikachu is the most difficult Pokéwalker Pokémon to obtain if you want to get both the special flying and surfing Pikachu from the Yellow Forest Pokéwalker course. This course was also an event course, but since it was available in American and European regions, it's more common than the Torchic course. The gimmick of the Yellow Forest is that every Pokémon here is a Pikachu. The rarest Pikachus are a 3% encounter rate and a 2% encounter rate. This is a little better than Torchic, but since you don't know if the Pikachu you are fighting is the special Pikachu or just a regular Pikachu, you're not gonna know which Pikachu it is until you transfer it back into the game, which will then reset the over 15,000 steps you need to take in order to get enough watts to even look for the Pikachu. Now, this isn't all bad. You can tell if you have a chance of it being the Pikachu you want by the amount of exclamation points that pop up on the grass patch. If there's only one exclamation point when the battle starts, that Pikachu will not be the one you're looking for, so don't catch it. However, if there are 2 exclamation points, that Pikachu will either be the mid-tier Pikachu, which you don't want, or the high-tier Pikachu you do want. But you don't know until you transfer it over. If you wait around for 3 exclamation points to appear, you know for a fact it's the top percentage Pikachu. Now, here's the dilemma. Do you either A, capture any Pikachu that shows up from 2 explanations, or B, wait until the 3 explanations appear so you know for sure it's the rare Pikachu? If there are any mathematicians in my audience that could come up with the formula that mathematically tells us which of those options is better, please let me know in the comments below. I honestly have no idea. So, let's say you actually do get one of the Pikachus. Now comes the worst part, getting the other one. You now have a 50% chance of the next super rare Pikachu being a duplicate. I'm not sure if Torchic is still the harder Pokemon to get your hands on compared to Pikachu, but if you're talking about trying to get both flying and surfing Pikachu, I think they take the cake as the rarest duo in Pokemon history. What would it take to actually do this challenge? You would need a Pokéwalker, which nowadays costs about $40, and an authentic copy of Pokemon Heart Gold or Soul Silver, which will probably set you back about $150. Then you'll need to get yourself a time machine in order to get the event Pokéwalker courses, which should set you back only about $8 billion. Jokes aside, it's unfortunate that this fun Pokemon accessory is so hard to get a hold of in the modern day. The Pokéwalker was super fun, and while things like Pokemon Go and the Pokéball Plus followed in the Pokéwalker's footsteps, nothing truly captured the magic of the Pokéwalker since. The 4 Regis are ancient and cryptic Pokémon often associated with convoluted and wacky encounter methods. Getting a hold of these Pokémon in the Pokémon Mystery Dungeon Explorers games is a Sisyphusian nightmare reserved only for gamers that have an abundance of free time and a high tolerance for RNG-related rage. Come join me on an expedition to Aegis Cave, the worst dungeon in the entire Pokémon Mystery Dungeon franchise. In order to understand the Aegis Cave, let's examine the full context of who the Regis are and how they were obtained in their introductory game. What I enjoy so much about the original Regi quest in the Hoenn games is how it encourages you to engage with different parts of the Pokémon experience. Most legendary Pokémon lie at the end of caves or other dungeons in an often straightforward path. The Regis, however, are anything but straightforward. If you found yourself in this dive area towards the end of the game, you could journey underwater to find this little piece of writing in Braille. If you were like me and read your handy Pokemon guidebook cover to cover, you would know that this is precisely why that guidebook included a section for translating Braille. Strange for the game to use a writing system designed to be read without seeing in a purely visual fashion on a screen, but it does add to the quest a lot. When translated, this text will tell you to use dive at this exact spot. If you use dive here, you will find yourself in this little cave. If you explore this cave for a little bit, the next Braille section will tell you to use dig in this exact spot. At this point, you may have to go back and find yourself a Pokemon with Dig if you didn't already have one in your party. I enjoy that the game is encouraging me to interact with a specific, sort of obscure attack like Dig. It makes me feel a connection to the Pokemon I brought to use Dig, like I'm selecting a little excavator friend to come with me to solve this mystery. Once you dig through to the next room, the Braille section tells you that you need to get a hold of a Relicanth and a Wailord. Now we have to go back out of this cave. Man, how many times do I have to take a trip out to this dive spot? Only once more, and it's not too bad to get here. The Reggie dive spot is located not too far from It's not located too far from a town you can fly to. Once you get these Pokemon into position on your team, you'll finally open up the Reggie Caves. In each Reggie Cave, there is one last little thing it asks you to do. In Emerald, these actions include things like walking around the perimeter of the area for Regice, using Rock Smash on a specific tile for Regirock, and using Flash in the center of the room for Registeel. All of these little things you have to do are revealed to you through the Braille writing and the Braille translating. The biggest strength of the Reggie quest is that it encourages the player to engage with multiple aspects of the game, such as catching Pokemon off the beaten path and using certain attacks in certain places outside of battle. Compare this to something like the Soot Sack game mechanic, also available in Hoenn, that just boils down to walking back and forth in certain places and grinding soot to get items. The Soot Sack encourages no other engagement with the game's many other interesting mechanics. I did a whole video on that, by the way. You should check it out right after this one. In Pokemon Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum, the Reggie quest gets expanded when the Reggie trio are required in order to get Regigigas, the king of the Reggies. In fact, the main reason I even got Emerald when I was younger was because Regigigas was the last legendary I didn't get a hold of. Regigigas encourages the player to engage with the PAL Park Pokemon transferring mechanic, which allows you to take Pokemon from your GBA games and transfer them up to your DS games. Beyond that, Regigigas doesn't have any cryptic Braille puzzles of its own. But after tracking down all three Reggies, going through a standard dungeon to capture Regigigas is a welcome return to normalcy. So if it isn't already clear, the Reggies are not normal legendaries by any means. Now that we see how the Reggies succeeded in being interesting encounters in their original source material, let's look at the lowest point of Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Explorers. Time to go to Aegis Cave. Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Explorers of Sky includes every legendary Pokemon that existed at that time, except Arceus. Since the game includes so many legendaries, they don't all get major plot significance. As such, the Reggies have little impact to the main story of the game, appearing in the post-game dungeon Aegis Cave as required bosses to continue the main narrative. You are introduced to the Aegis Cave by Team Charm, a team consisting of Lopunny, Medicham, and Gardevoir. Their appearance in this part of the game boils down to them telling you where the Aegis Cave is, taking part in the final battle against Regigigas, and not much else. When you get to the Aegis Cave, it will be immediately apparent that this is no normal dungeon. Most dungeons take you directly to a first floor, but this one starts in what looks like a midway room of a two-part dungeon. In the center of this midway room is a big slab that shows you the stones that you are going to need to collect in order to move on. You start in Aegis Cave Ice, a 3-floor dungeon consisting of Unknown. In fact, all of the dungeon sections in Aegis Cave consist of Unknown. You'll notice relatively quickly that the Unknown will sometimes drop a rock bearing the letter of that Unknown. The key word here is sometimes, a distinction that turns this from a semi-frustrating challenge to a bash my DS to bits challenge. The way to progress in the Aegis Cave is to find the letter rocks that spell out the type of that particular section's Reggie boss. Each section's dungeon is around 3 floors, but you'll probably be going through those floors more than once, and while you're on those floors, you aren't just locating the stairs, you're trying to locate these alphabetical rocks. And therein lies the problem. It's just a bunch of RNG. You go around bashing all these weak unknowns, hoping you encounter the right one, and when you encounter the right one, you pray to Arceus that it drops the rock you need. But remember, the developers didn't include Arceus in this game. So, after a tedious afternoon, you finally find yourself finishing off the 3 Reggies. After defeating Registeel, you'll immediately find yourself in the Aegis Cave pit. Regigigas doesn't have a puzzle of its own. While this is a huge sigh of relief as there isn't more RNG to deal with, I do think that the last stretch of Aegis Cave is a little bit of an afterthought by the developers. It's just a 5-floor dungeon. Dungeons are usually around 20 floors on average by this point in the game. The worst part about it is that it still just has a bunch of unknowns, yet they don't serve any purpose. You might encounter a Crobat or a Machamp, but there's no other Pokemon variety besides that. Then at the end of the cave, you fight Regigigas and his squad of 4 Bronzong and 4 Hitmonlee. Okay, like, I get Bronzong. Both Bronzong and Regigigas have this kind of ancient tech thing going on, but Hitmonlee? That's just a guy. What does this have to do with the theming of Regigigas? It totally should have been 4 Mamoswine. They're both prehistoric, they're both found in cold places, and they even collaborate in the 11th Pokémon movie. So once you finish the Aegis Cave, you finally get your reward. The 4 Regis join your team. Just kidding. You can't recruit them on your first playthrough. You have to go back and do the exact same thing again. Literally, no difference. Just do the exact same thing you did again. To make matters worse, Regice, Regirock, and Registeel only have a 50% chance to join your team. Why couldn't the trio just always join you like Regigigas does? Statistically speaking, if you want to get all the Regis, you're most likely going to have to do all the unknown nonsense 3 times. If you're lucky. There is one workaround. Wonder Mail. So in Mystery Dungeon, there's this bulletin board of different jobs. These are randomly generated side quests separate from the main game that challenge the player to do certain things in certain dungeons, such as saving a Pokemon lost on a certain floor, protecting a Pokemon that joins your team, or taking down a dangerous outlaw Pokemon. These bulletin board quests are randomly generated, and each come with a little code called Wonder Mail. If you got an interesting looking job on the bulletin board, you could give the code to a friend and they can actually put that mission onto their own game. These codes could be cracked, and you can generate any possible combination of missions and, more importantly, rewards within the game. There are websites that can generate a Wonder Mail code for you, and they can generate a Wonder Mail code with rewards that you would never see on the bulletin board normally. These rewards could be the insanely OP golden seeds that make you go up 5 levels, rare Pokemon-specific boosting items, or even the unknown stones. If you want the Regis, I say it is significantly faster to just generate Wonder Mail with the unknown stones as the prizes, so you can go into Aegis Cave and just go right to fighting the Regis. You can only do 8 missions at a time, so you're gonna have to break it up. Since you have to do the quest twice, you'll need to do 24 missions altogether. Since you'll be going into the dungeon with the rocks ready, you'll have the luxury of being able to save beforehand, so if any of the Regis don't join your team, you can just reset until you get the lucky 3 coin flips and all 3 want to join. The easiest missions are the rescue missions, so just make it one of those. The Pokemon you rescue doesn't matter. I just had to be Bulbasaur because that's the first one on there. Waterfall Cave is the earliest dungeon with 8 floors, so set it there. Since you're in the post-game, this early game dungeon is a cakewalk. While putting in all the Wonder Mail codes is also a tedious and long process, you at least know how long it's going to take, and it's going to be a lot quicker than actually getting the unknown rocks the correct way. But doesn't that speak to how bad the Aegis Cave is? If players are literally encouraged to manipulate the game in order to skip over your game section, then you as a developer have failed to create meaningful and engaging gameplay. What could the developers have done to make the Aegis Cave and the Regi Quest a better part of the game? To be fair, they were stuck in a corner. The Mystery Dungeon developers needed to find an interesting way to incorporate the Regis into the game to reflect how they are represented in their source material. In some ways, they were going in the right direction with the concept. I like that the Regis were tied to the unknown. I'm pretty sure this is one of the only times in the franchise where unknown and the Regis are related, even though they are both mysterious and cryptic Pokemon. I also don't hate the concept of spelling something out with unknown letters in order to progress through a dungeon. One of the biggest problems with Pokemon Mystery Dungeon is how repetitive its gameplay is. Fight Pokemon, find stairs, rinse and repeat. Don't run out of Reviver Seeds. It's not an easy kind of gameplay loop to subvert, and when you're dealing with Pokemon whose identity revolve around subverting gameplay expectations, you find yourself in a bit of a tricky situation development-wise. Even with all these challenges, I think I've figured something out. First off, Unknown should have a 100% chance of holding their stone. I would say the worst part of this challenge by far is that the unknown you're looking for may show up and then not drop the stone. That sort of double RNG can be really dissatisfying to players. Second, the dungeons themselves should be a little more challenging. Unknown are weak. They have low stats and they only know one attack, Hidden Power, an attack which has a gimmick of being a random move type. But what if Unknown had some backup? Lots of backup. What if the Aegis Cave was chock full of monster houses? For those that don't know, a monster house is when you walk into a room in a dungeon and a bunch of enemy Pokemon just immediately spawn in. They are the scariest and most dangerous part of Mystery Dungeon. Aegis Cave should have a 100% chance to spawn a monster house on every floor. So instead of painstakingly fighting your way through about one unknown per minute, you'll see about 10 to 15 of them at once and be able to immediately identify how many letters you have. I think these monster houses should be unique, as only Unknown should appear in them. In fact, I think Unknown should only spawn in monster houses, with the other non-Unknown Pokemon appearing elsewhere. This will also make the Unknowns actually threatening. Hidden Power isn't too tough to deal with on its own, but multiple Unknowns using the attack in a row will mean that one of them is probably going to get a super effective typing against you. With the Unknown Stones being a little easier to get in my version, I do think the Regigigas section should be redesigned to be more in line with the first 3 sections. You'll now need to gather the letters Gigas as well as an exclamation point. The question mark and exclamation point Unknowns do in fact drop rocks, even though they are useless, so I think this would give them a fun use. Also, there should be some other use for the Unknown rocks, something a little more universal. It's just unfortunate that you'll have all these letters that don't really mean anything outside of the few you need to progress. I think there should be some sort of addition to the Spinda Cafe that uses the letters to give you other useful items. Maybe it could be a station run by Smeargle, who uses the letters in calligraphy or something. The reason I feel that Aegis Cave truly failed to be an enjoyable part of this game is because it doesn't encourage the player to engage with different parts of the gameplay of Mystery Dungeon. There is no optimal strategy, there's no ideal moves or Pokemon to use. It's just repetitively going over a proverbial RNG slot machine of unknowns until finally it's over and you don't have to do it anymore. That's one of the worst feelings a video game can invoke, and it's truly disappointing that the Pokemon that I have such fond memories in one game have given me the worst memories in another. I am a big fan of the cool and unique Pokéballs. Luxury Ball, Premier Ball, Repeat Ball. Once I discovered all these, I couldn't bring myself to put one of my Poké friends in a boring little red sphere. Of all the different Pokéballs, one of the coolest designs around is the Moon Ball. There's so many Pokemon I'd love to entrap in this thing. Umbreon, Dusknoir, Lunatone, and Darkrai, to name a few. Unfortunately, none of these Pokemon can be captured in a Moon Ball until well past Generation 7. And considering my peak Pokemon playtime was Gens 4 and 5, I never truly got to use the Moon Ball in the way I wanted to. Why is the Moon Ball so scarce? What does it do, and can we spin its rarity into a crazy shiny hunt challenge? Stay tuned to find out. The Moon Ball is one of 7 Apricorn Balls. The Apricorn Balls. They aren't particularly special Pokeballs yet. Since their introduction in Generation 2, Game Freak decided to make them the rarest and most difficult to get a hold of items in the Pokemon franchise. Nowadays, Apricorn Balls are either once per game gimmicks or extremely rare prizes. They really should have just been sold in shops starting in Generation 3 along with the other cool and unique Pokeballs. There's already so few Pokeballs to choose from. Did you really have to be this stingy, Game Freak? The reason I lament the rarity of the Apricorn Balls is that they all have unique and interesting gimmicks, but they aren't particularly overpowered. They exist in this medium where they are just good enough that I want to use them in game, but not good enough to justify their rarity. I'm not complaining that you usually only get one Master Ball per game, because that's a Pokeball that never fails. Of course there's only going to be one per game. But why is a Pokeball that works better on Pokemon you find while fishing so rare? A netball gives the same benefit. You can buy that in a regular shop. It can be argued that these balls are so rare because they are just supposed to be cool little gimmicks, something you can slap on your Pokémon to make it unique. But if that's the case, one per game is still too little. The thing about Pokéballs is if they don't successfully capture a wild Pokémon, you lose it completely. And statistically speaking, you'll probably just lose your Apricorn Ball unless you go out of your way to save before using it, which is a pain. Did they really implement these items so that players could painstakingly save manipulate to actually use them? And to play devil's advocate, I do put the Pokémon I caught in these Apricorn Balls on a bit of a pedestal, even going so far as to sometimes nickname my Pokémon in line with the special Pokéball they reside in. So perhaps that's what they're going for, and in that sense, they did succeed. I just wish they would have used new Pokéballs that had a purpose that justified their rarity, rather than taking the old Apricorn Balls and plunging them into obscurity. The Apricorn Balls are most accessible in their home region of Johto in Pokémon Gold, Silver, and Crystal, and their remakes Pokémon Heart Gold and Soul Silver. Until Generation 7, those were the only games you could receive and capture Pokémon in Apricorn Balls, leaving the pool of possible Pokémon to get in them quite small. The way to get Apricorn Balls in Johto is to gather apricorns that grow around the region on trees that regrow once per day. You could take your apricorns to Kurt, the Pokéball creator, who will then take all the apricorns you have of one color and turns them into Pokéballs the next day. So even though apricorns are accessible, in practice they are such a pain to get and so useless once you get them, I'm just not motivated to go through all this trouble for Pokéballs that just aren't very good. The Apricorn Balls all have different uses and different gimmicks depending on their color. What all the Apricorn Balls do is a subject for another video, so we are just going to focus on the most useless Apricorn Ball of all, the Moon Ball. The Moon Ball has a 4 times catch rate, twice as powerful as an Ultra Ball, on Pokémon that evolve with a Moonstone. In Gen 2, the Moon Ball actually only works better on Pokémon that evolve using a Burn Heal, which is none of them. Though the Apricorn Balls aren't a big deal in Gen 2 because you can't see the Pokéball your Pokémon was caught in, which to me is kind of the whole reason they matter at all. In Gen 4, they fixed the Burn Heal glitch, and the Moon Ball now works well on a total of 4 Pokémon. That's it, 4 Pokémon. A whole Pokéball for Clefairy, Jigglypuff, Nidorino, and Nidorina. Skitty also evolves with a Moonstone, but cannot be captured in a Moon Ball anywhere in Johto or Kanto. I was actually shocked this was the case about Skitty. There's a whole game mechanic called Hoenn Sound that makes certain Gen 3 Pokemon spawn in certain places if you play the Hoenn Sound music station. The developers did not add Skitty to the list of Pokemon in Hoenn Sound, instead opting for it to be caught on the Pokéwalker, where every Pokemon comes in a default Pokéball. Lame. This means that Game Freak had a clear opportunity to make it possible for every Moonstone Pokemon to be caught in a Moonball, and just went, nah. I guess Game Freak was aware that only one crazy person would actually care about this, so they didn't bother. In fact, if I had to guess, I think the devs didn't even consider this for a second. So that's it, a whole Pokéball for 4 Pokemon. Definitely the most niche Pokéball in the entire series. Functionally, it's really just a cooler looking Premier Ball that's harder to get a hold of. There is one more thing that irks me about the Moon Ball, and it's that all 4 Pokemon that the Moon Ball would work best on all appear in the post-game. This means that even if you get Moon Balls from Kurt as early as Badge 2, they won't be able to be used for their intended function until after defeating the champion. Is anyone really encountering a level 23 Nidorino in the post-game where their team is already in their 50s and 60s and they have access to an abundance of other effective Pokeballs and they're like, thank Arceus, I've got the moon ball. I never would have caught this otherwise. This robs the player of being able to go through their Johto playthrough with an authentic moon ball captured Nidoking or Clefable. Sure, you can capture a regular Nidoran in a moon ball, but Nidoran doesn't get the Pokeball boost, so it would be no harder than capturing it in a regular Pokeball, and it's just not the same. I know you weren't caught with 4 times effectiveness, you fraud. Could the moon ball have been improved? Of course. I think the moon ball should be a little easier to get a hold of, and the moonstone Pokemon should be able to be captured before the postgame. But what about the issue of how few Pokemon the moon ball actually works on? If the moon ball was expanded to work well on other Pokemon, then it wouldn't really have the moon ball identity anymore. Honestly, I don't really mind that there's a whole Pokeball that works well on so few Pokemon. Actually, I think that's one of the coolest things about the moon ball. Really, the big problem with the moon ball is that there's just the moon ball. Why not a Pokeball for the other Pokemon that evolved from stones? I guess that would mean there'd be a lot of different Pokeballs, but then maybe there should be a lot of different Pokeballs. Not just stone-related Pokeballs, but other that work on different types or other gimmicks. What's with 3 Pokeballs that work well on water Pokemon, 1 that works well on bug Pokemon, and every other type it just doesn't have one? Why not? The opportunity's there, why don't they take it? This is a subject for another video though. Let me know if that's something you'd want to see. Back on the subject of the moon ball, it's clear that something like the moon ball isn't intended to be a game-breaking strategic juggernaut. It's just supposed to have you go, I've got this item with me and it will actually work better against this Jigglypuff I encountered. And then that encounter now has something a little bit special associated with it. If they were just a little less scarce and the Pokemon they caught were a little more available, that feeling would have been achieved properly. So now that we've established why the moon ball is so special and rare, let's get to the moment you've all been waiting for. It's time to embark on the Moon Ball Challenge. Capturing a legendary Pokemon in a Pokeball is not a new challenge. They're the hardest Pokemon to catch and the weakest Pokeball around. So why did I choose Mewtwo for this challenge? Because it looks awesome. No further questions. So I wanted to do more than just another challenge where you have to painstakingly grind up a bunch of rare Pokeballs to shiny hunt something. I already did that with my Luxury Ball challenge where I tasked players with capturing a shiny Rayquaza and a Luxury Ball in Pokemon Emerald where Luxury Balls were incredibly scarce. Check out that video, by the way, if you haven't seen it. However, Rayquaza in Generation 3 is just a more difficult legendary to catch than Mewtwo in Gen 4. Rayquaza had Rest for self-healing and Outrage that would self-inflict confusion. It was a risky Pokemon to go after. Heart Gold and Soul Silver's Mewtwo is just not that tough in terms of legendary encounters. And also, Gen 4 gives you way more access to good Pokemon. So, what if you didn't have as much access to Pokemon? After all, this is the Moon Ball Challenge. If I'm so dedicated to the Moon Ball that I'm gonna shiny hunt Mewtwo in it, then I'm gonna have to put everyone in my team in a Moon Ball. So here's one more crucial layer to the Moon Ball Challenge. You are required to get one of each Pokemon that actually has an increased catch rate from the Moon Ball. And since this is a shiny hunt challenge, they've all gotta sparkle. But before we go on the shiny hunt, we've gotta gather our Moon Balls. As mentioned before, the way to get apricorn balls is to bring apricorns to Kurt. Moon balls are made from yellow apricorns. Each apricorn tree regrows once per day, so we just have to gather all the yellow apricorns in the game each day until we have roughly about 80, which will give us enough for the Mewtwo fight and our 4 moon ball captures. So let's start gathering apricorns. How many yellow apricorns can we get in one day anyway? 15? 20? 4? Wait, you're telling me that throughout all of Kanto and Johto, there are only 4 yellow apricorn trees? I thought the apricorn trees were everywhere. 4? Seriously? I guess they're a lot more scarce than I remember. This means that it'll take nearly 3 weeks to get enough apricorns for the challenge if you go gather them every day. There's one located on Route 8 in Kanto, right next to Lavender Town. This is the only one in Kanto, and it's annoying that one happens to be in Kanto because of that weird arbitrary rule where you have to fly to the Pokemon League before you fly to the other region. Another one is located just below Violet City, which is also pretty easy to reach. The next one is in this patch of 3 over here in between Mahogany Town on Route 42, which requires Surf and Cut to get. You'll also want to use a Repel, or you'll probably get a lake encounter. Seems like a small task, but these little things add up. The last one is located all the way over here on Route 46, which is a brisk little hike through some tall grass. Grab those 4 over a few weeks and put Kurt to work. At least with Skitty unobtainable, that's one less shiny hunt to do, so for all you crazy challengers out there, that's about 40 hours of your life you can have back. This leaves us with needing to get a hold of Clefairy, Jigglypuff, Nidorino, and Nidorina. Nidorino and Nidorina are the easiest to find. They both have a 30% encounter rate over on Route 15 in Kanto. You should find your first shiny after about, say, 20 to 30,000 random encounters. Imagine how much it would hurt to encounter the same shiny twice. Like, you get 2 shiny Nidorinas before you find 1 shiny Nidorino. That sounds like some RNG pain. You can use Repel Trick, but it's minimally effective, only making it less likely to find Hoppip in the day and Quagsire at night. Probably not even worth the time spent to go into your bag and use the repels. Then you've got Jigglypuff, a 10% encounter rate over on Route 3. That's rough. You're looking at an average of 80,000 random encounters to find it. Still with me? If you Repel Trick at night, then you will not encounter any Zubats because they are level 5, while Jigglypuff is level 6, meaning you'll remove the 30% of Zubat. However, daytime is the better time to hunt, but only if you're playing Heart Gold, since Ekans and Arbok, who are both higher level than Jigglypuff, do not appear in that version. It's probably better to get Heart Gold and hunt for Jiggly in the daytime, since you'll erase all 30% of Rattatas and half of the 55% encounter rate Spearows, removing 57.5% of encounters. Then there's Clefairy, a 5% encounter rate. Eee. Now, I'm conflicted between Heart Gold and Soul Silver, because Heart Gold has Sandshrew and Sandslash as an encounter in Mount Moon, which always appear at the same level or higher than the always level 8 Clefairy. In Soul Silver, the game compensates for the lack of Sandshrew and Sandslash with higher rates for Zubat and Geodude, who may appear as level 6, which will be removed if you use the Repel Trick, but they can also be found at higher levels as well. So that means that in Heart Gold, you remove 30% of encounters with Repel Trick, since Zubat is always level 6 in that game, but in Soul Silver, Repel Trick will remove 42.5% of encounter. This means that in Heart Gold, you'll have an easier time finding shiny Jigglypuff by removing 57.5% of the encounters, but in Soul Silver, you'll have an easier time finding Clefairy by removing 42.5% of encounters. Keep in mind, Jigglypuff is a 10% encounter rate, while Clefairy is a 5% encounter rate, and both only remove 30% of encounters in their worst version. So, which version should you get? I've done enough math for someone who's majored in creative writing. Go sort it out in the comments. That is, if you're truly a math genius. Once you get your Moonball Pokemon, you're gonna want to evolve them with their signature Moonstone. It's not too difficult to get 4 Moonstones. There are 2 you would have already picked up on your journey, and your mom might have sent you one too if you let her hold on to your money. However, if you really want to embrace this challenge for all it's worth, I would say you should get at least 1 Moonstone from the Clefairy dance. At Mount Moon Square on Monday nights, you can find all these Clefairy dancing around the lake with the moon shining above. When the Clefairy spot you, they all run away, leaving behind a Moonstone. So now that we've grown a comically large beard while catching these shinies, it's time to prep for the Mewtwo battle. So here's the funny thing about this. Nidoking and Nidoqueen are completely unnecessary for the battle. You will not need to send them out once. The only thing we need is for one of them to use Surf so we can navigate the cave. Speaking of field moves, you're probably gonna want Flash to get through this cave. You technically don't need Flash, but the move could actually help in the battle. Mewtwo's moveset is really forgiving. Its only attacking move is Psycho Cut, a 70 power physical psychic type move. Assuming we level up both Wigglytuff and Clefairy to level 100, they're not going to take that much damage from it. Mewtwo also has Amnesia, which raises its special defense, but that's not going to matter too much. And it also carries the obscure attacks Guard Swap and Power Swap. Guard Swap changes defensive stat changes with the opponent, and Power Swap changes offensive stat changes with the opponent. This just switches the stat changes, not the stats themselves. So if Mewtwo uses Amnesia, it will then gift the special defense over to you, which won't matter because Mewtwo's only attacking move is physical. Psycho Cut and Amnesia have 20 PP, while the swap attacks have 10, leaving you a guaranteed 40 turns, but we'll be able to get a bit more than that. Wigglytuff will have the moves Thunder Wave, Flash, and Pound, while Clefable will have the moves Trick, Minimize, and Mud Slap. I considered having Wigglytuff and Clefable use Sing instead of using Thunder Wave, but I just couldn't justify that low accuracy of a move. I think Thunder Wave is the better option. Getting some of these moves will actually require you to go to the Battle Frontier. You'll need 32 BP for the Thunder Wave TM. 32 BP is a lot. The Battle Frontier is stingy with its currency. You're gonna get like 1 BP for beating 7 trainers. It's madness. You'll at least get something like 20 BP when you beat a Frontier Brain, which happens after you beat 21 trainers in a row. Thunder Wave isn't even that great of a move. It can even be taught for free in Fire Red and Leaf Green, but Fire Red and Leaf Green doesn't have the Moon Ball. So next we have to teach Mud Slap, which also costs BP but at a move tutor. The reason I went with Mud Slap is because it is an attack so weak that it can make Mewtwo go from low yellow into red health without knocking it out, even if it happens to crit. Since Mud Slap is such a weak move tutor move, it probably wouldn't cost that much BP to teach. What'll it be? 4 BP? 6? 32 more BP! 32! You have to defeat one of the titans of the Battle Frontier in order to get enough BP to learn a move that Mudkip learns at level 6? What strategic value does this move hold that makes its tutoring so expensive? These developers, man. Last is Trick. 48 BP. Hope you like more battles. At least Trick feels a little more justified in its BP cost. I mean, none of these BP costs are fair considering how hard it is to build up BP, but still, Trick is a unique, strategically valuable move unlike Mud Slap. Now it's battle time. The first thing you want to do in the battle is inflict Paralysis. Paralysis will sometimes cause Mewtwo not to attack, buying you turns. It also increases its catch rate. Then you'll want to hit it with about 4 or so flashes, meaning it will sometimes miss its Psycho Cut. Wigglytuff's Pound can be used once or twice before Mewtwo gets into crit range. At that point, you'll need to switch into Clefable for its piddling Mud Slap. Then you'll want to minimize around 4 times, making it even less likely to be hit with a Psycho Cut. This is more important for Clefable because Clefable doesn't have leftovers. Instead, Clefable carries a Lepa Berry, which it will then trick onto Mewtwo, buying you an extra 10 turns, or possibly more thanks to Paralysis, should Mewtwo run out of PP. Now that we're set, it's time to start throwing Moon Balls. If your health gets low, you can heal, but Mewtwo misses so often that it probably won't even be necessary. I caught my Mewtwo before it ran out of PP, which kinda makes the 48 BP used to get Trick feel kind of like a waste, but in shiny hunting, those extra turns could mean far more hours wasted than it would take to play the Battle Frontier. And there you have it. One of the coolest shinies caught by one of the most useless balls by one of the most unique teams. This is truly a Pokemon challenge that would take many moons to complete. The line between non-legendary and legendary Pokemon is usually pretty thick. Jigglypuff, not legendary. Lugia, legendary. Rotom, if you've only played recent games, you wouldn't understand why I would even consider this commonly seen Pokemon to be a legendary on par with Mewtwo, Rayquaza, or Dialga, but there are a few quirks to Rotom's early appearances that suggest it may have at least been considered for the role of legendary. I have poured through Rotom's appearances, and I think I have finally cracked the decades-old mystery of Rotom's legendary status. In Pokémon Diamond and Pearl, the player can encounter Rotom at the Old Chateau in the post-game. At nighttime, the TV in this haunted mansion appears to be on, and if you interact with it, Rotom comes out to play. When Rotom is encountered, it plays the same encounter music that you hear when you battle Heatran, Regigigas, Giratina, and even Darkrai. When you trigger the battle, it also does this weird spinny encounter transition, which is also associated with legendaries. It's strange for a regular static encounter to have these sorts of characteristics. In fact, no non-legendary Pokemon in the entire series has different battle music except for Rotom. Rotom does have an unusually low level for a legendary at level 15. However, there have been some legendary encounters at as low as level 30 before this. And later on, Regigigas appears at level 1 in Pokemon Platinum. Yes, seriously. So, high encounter levels is not a prerequisite to being a legendary. So, if you're encountering Rotom for the first time and haven't heard of the Pokemon before, you would probably assume that this is a legendary. I certainly did. Rotom, however, is able to breed, which is something that legendaries are not associated with, being all one of a kind and whatnot. However, Manaphy can breed with Ditto as well, and Manaphy is unambiguously a legendary Pokemon in Gen 4. I know it's a mythical, but the mythical denomination actually came about in Gen 5, so they were all legendaries back then. But Manaphy doesn't breed another Manaphy. It breeds a Phione. But Phione can breed more Phione, and Phione is a legendary Pokemon as well. Phione's legendary/mythical status was disputed for a while for this reason, but it was eventually confirmed mythical, which kinda means that breeding is not a disqualifier of legendariness. But the biggest piece of evidence that convinced me that Rotom was in fact a legendary was its Pokédex number placement. Rotom is placed between two groups of Pokemon in the Pokédex. The first group are the new Sinnoh evolutions, and directly after Rotom are all the Sinnoh legendaries. But there's one other major disqualification of Rotom's legendary status. Its base stats. It has a 440 base stat total, which is the same as Qwilfish. Qwilfish. Rotom then got a few changes in Pokemon Platinum. Rotom can now be encountered as soon as you reach the Old Chateau right after the second badge instead of in the post-game. While it still has legendary encounter music, the fact that it's an early encounter is a massive blow to the pro-legendary side of this debate. Who gets a legendary with 2 badges? But Rotom also got something that only legendaries got in Platinum: new forms, each based on a household appliance. Not only did Rotom get new forms, but those forms were event exclusive, meaning that the appliance versions of Rotom were on the same plane as Pokemon like Deoxys, Mew, and Arceus. This event exclusivity would not last. In Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver, Rotom can be granted access to its other forms without needing a special event item. If the player enters the Silph elevator with Rotom first in the party, they can access a room with all of the form-changing appliances. This is definitely a downgrade to the exclusivity of the Rotom forms, but to be honest, it's a welcome change, as it made the forms more available to players who didn't happen to get the initial event. So I think in Gen 4, the devs were unsure about Rotom's legendary status. They were just kind of toying with the idea of it being a legendary, but didn't want to fully commit to it. Rotom's presence in the Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Explorers games, I think, really speaks to this. Despite being one of the major new Gen 4 Pokemon, Rotom is barely present within the game. It's a version exclusive to Explorers of Darkness and also appears in Explorers of Sky in one dungeon, Midnight Forest, which is an optional dungeon that can be unlocked through finding a random side quest, meaning many players would likely never visit this dungeon throughout their entire playthrough. Rotom appears in this dungeon in its lowest floors and has an unlikely spawn and recruit rate. This is as close to Rotom just being completely left out of the game as the devs could have possibly gotten. I think this speaks to a reluctance to use Rotom as a legendary, but also not wanting to completely downgrade it to non-legendary status by having it appear so flippantly in regular dungeons. So, they hid it away. While one could argue this means that Rotom is definitely not or never was a legendary, since even all the way back then they had it be a repeatable, regular encounter, I think this more so speaks to an indecisiveness on the part of the devs. This brings us to Gen 5. In Pokemon Black and White, Rotom can be obtained through a once-per-game in-game trade for a Ditto. For me, this was the first time I accepted that Rotom is in fact not a legendary, but don't you think this is still odd exclusivity? A Pokemon only being available through in-game trade isn't something we see often, even though it was prevalent in Gen 1. Seems like at this point they want Rotom to be special, but not legendary, as not only does this regular trainer have one, but he's even willing to part with it for a non-legendary Pokemon like Ditto. And from then on, Rotom just becomes a regular, uncommon, bordering on rare Pokemon. Hard to believe at this point that this Pokemon originated with the same battle music as Giratina and Darkrai. Today, Rotom is actually one of the most prevalent Pokemon in the entire series. In Generation 7, the Pokédex was possessed by a Rotom, similar to how Rotom possesses the appliances it takes the form of. And starting in Generation 8, Rotoms now come included with every phone and bike. No way this is a legendary now, it's everywhere! But even though Rotom is not a legendary today, I just don't understand why it had that battle music all the way back in Gen 4, or why it's placed next to all these legendaries in the Pokédex, or why it got event-exclusive alternate forms. Why would a non-legendary Pokemon get that sort of treatment? I think I figured it out. So, Rotom isn't actually the only disputed legendary of Gen 4. In fact, it's one of 3. We already went over Fione before, but Lucario also had a strange semi-legendary status during this time. Maybe this is just playground rumor anecdotes, but I heard Lucario referred to as a legendary all the time back in the day. In Black and White, Zoroark was basically a mythical Pokemon, as it could only be obtained in an event. So, why is this legendary Pokemon distinction so important? It's all about marketing. Legendary Pokemon sell games, they sell cards, they sell movie tickets. That's why legendaries are just about always on the box art. Because legendaries are so important to the marketing of Pokemon, the Pokemon Company has to be extremely careful about how they use them. Oversaturate the legendary pool and they lose their moxie. Have too few legendaries and you lose your marketing edge. So, what if you had an in-between? What if there were more legendaries, but some of them are just legendarier than others? Design some legendaries to be mysterious and special without taking away from your big marketing juggernauts. That's what Rotom was supposed to be. The same goes for Lucario, Fione, and Zoroark. And for some reason or another, Game Freak decided against moving forward with the experiment, instead opting to have either legendary/mythicals or non-legendaries with no in-between. This is why Rotom had legendary music but was still able to breed and had a low stat total. It was supposed to be a lower tier of legendary. Still special, but not as special as the truly once-per-game better legendaries. So that's why Rotom was the way it was from a marketing perspective. But is there also perhaps an in-universe explanation for this? I mean, why is it that there's only one Rotom in the region of Sinnoh, yet in Galar there's so many of them they're getting stuffed in phones? I think that the mysterious nature of Rotom, as well as its ability to be bred, led to a human-made overpopulation, which in turn destroyed the very mysteriousness that made it so popular in the first place. What was once an urban legend about the spirit of the old chateau is now a commercially available product. Much like how Game Freak saw that Rotom had no use as a creature of legend, so did the people of the Pokemon world. And Rotom fell from the stuff of legend to the stuff of the mundane. But what do you think? Do you think it's possible that Game Freak was trying to make a new subclass of legendary? Do you think it would have worked if they committed to it? Do you think Game Freak thought about any of this, or am I just nuts? Let me know in the comments below. The main goal of a Pokemon game is to collect 8 badges and become the Pokemon Champion. As such, most Nuzlocke challenges end with the champion battle. But there are other overarching goals present in the Pokemon games. I, for one, always made it my goal to capture every legendary Pokemon whenever I did a playthrough. So, what if there was a Nuzlocke challenge that required the player to capture every legendary Pokemon? I call it the Legendary Nuzlocke. How could this be accomplished? Can it even be done? Stay tuned to the end of this video and you might find yourself eager to take on the Nuzlocke community's newest challenge. I'll go into this video assuming you already know the hardcore Nuzlocke rules, like only catching the first unique Pokemon per area, permanent losses, no items in battle, and level caps. In addition to the standard Nuzlocke rules, the goal of the legendary Nuzlocke is to capture every legendary and mythical Pokemon available in a given game. In any area where a legendary is present, you have to make sure you don't encounter any other Pokemon until you encounter the legendary. That way, the legendary will be your first encounter. If the first encounter in that area is anything other than that legendary, it's an automatic forfeit of the run, so you better be sure you've got lots of repels ready to go. If you accidentally knock out a legendary or it happens to struggle itself down, you lose the run entirely. Remember how you used to save before every legendary encounter in case you messed it up? Can't do that anymore. Since most mythical encounters are locked behind events, you might have to use some enhancements in order to get the fullest out of this challenge. Also, since this challenge goes into the post-game, the final level cap will always be whatever the highest level Pokemon is of the highest level trainer in the game. For example, in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, your max level cap is level 88 to correspond with Red's Pikachu. And even if you do defeat Red, you still aren't allowed to go past that. No level 100 Pokemon allowed. There are a few legendaries throughout the series that are captured in the same area, such as Hull and Lugia both being encountered at Naval Rock in Fire Red, Leaf Green, and Emerald, and Dialga and Palkia both being encountered at Spear Pillar in Platinum. I tried to figure out some sort of loophole to justify this, but honestly, you're just going to have to suspend your disbelief and bend the rules for these legendaries and these legendaries only. And one last rule, the legendaries themselves can be used on your team. Most Nuzlockes of vanilla games ban the use of legendaries entirely, as they will make the run too easy. Since this is already such a difficult challenge, you might as well get thrown a bone with some overpowered team members. So, now that we've gone over the rules, let's talk strategy. You will have to be conscious of your encounters throughout the game to make sure you have the right Pokemon to fight these legendaries and survive the long battles. Bulky Pokemon with self-healing are an absolute must. If you can't get a good self-healer, you might have to resort to using a Pokemon with rest instead. The problem with rest is that you have to waste 2 turns with attacks in order to wake up to rest again. A Pokemon with false swipe access could do you good as well, and you'll want a reliable sleep or paralysis inducer. In order to get the right Pokemon, you want to use Dupe's Claws to your advantage and try and take what little control you have of encounters in order to get the right Pokemon for the job. Since you don't need to catch the legendaries in any particular order, when you catch each legendary is also important. You have to be aware of your level cap and how over-leveled beyond the legendary you can be. You can be significantly stronger than level 50 and lower legendaries if you wait until later on in the run to go and capture them, while the level 70 and up legendaries are always going to be pretty difficult. And if you think this already sounds pretty tough, might I remind you of the existence of roaming legendaries. I'm sure you already know what roaming legendaries are, but if you'd like a refresher, I did a little video over on my short form content channel going over and critiquing their design. If you'd like, go check that video out and come right back to this one. If you're doing a legendary Nuzlocke in a game with roamers, you're going to have to leave an area unencountered so that you can come back and make sure that the roamer is the first encounter there. Then once the roamer is active, you'll have to lure it to that area. And you're gonna need to guarantee it's your first encounter. as even when the roamer is on the route, you might encounter something else before it. But before you do that, make sure you encounter the roamer on a route where you've already gotten an encounter, so you can weaken it first. If you weaken the roamer in a different area, it'll retain the same health and even a status condition when you encounter it again in a different area. Once it's weakened, go to an area where you haven't gotten an encounter yet and make sure it's your first. There are actually multiple ways you can guarantee the roamer will be your first encounter. One way to guarantee this is to use Dupe's Clause to your advantage. If you've already captured every encounter in the area where the roamer can appear, then only that roamer can be your true first encounter. However, this may not be possible in every run, and if it isn't, you'll have to use Repel Trick. Since roamers are almost always higher leveled than the other Pokemon around them, Repel Trick will always make it the first Pokemon you find. The problem with using Repel Trick is your first Pokemon has to be the same level as the roamer. This only works past Generation 4, but if you get a decently speedy Pokemon with both a blocking move and Trick Room, you can switch into a bulkier blocking Pokemon and trap them. Also, if you're going up against a roamer with an attack like Roar that ends the battle, you'll need to be equipped with the move Taunt, which will prevent the use of Roar. While this helps against roaring roamers, this still makes these roamers particularly risky encounters because Taunt only lasts a few turns, and when you run out of PP, it might be game over. Battling the roamers is difficult and scary. You'll have to make sure you've encountered Pokemon capable of using trapping moves and that are also faster than the roamer. Roamers are probably where most players would use their once per game 100% catch rate Master Ball. But some games have multiple roamers. Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver have 3 roamers, while Pokemon Platinum has 5 roamers. Yikes! Beyond the initial difficulty of getting every legendary Pokemon, there's one other thing you can do that would spice up this challenge. Pokeball restriction. Not only do you have to catch every legendary, but you've got to do it with nothing but regular Pokeballs, meaning you're in for longer, tougher battles. I would recommend doing the challenge without Pokeball restrictions before trying it with them. You could even have some wacky Pokeball restrictions, like making it so you can only use Apricorn balls to catch the legendaries in the Johto games, which would require the player to tediously craft Apricorn balls over a period of real-time weeks in order to get enough balls to go after each legend. Or you could do the challenge in Pokemon Emerald with only luxury balls, which weren't sold in shops back in that game, and could only be obtained in a repeatable fashion by winning a Master Rank contest. This would mean that the player would have to use one of their encounters as a contest Pokemon, and boy, that Pokemon would need to compete in a lot of contests. Or, if you want to be particularly cruel to yourself, you could even have an Ultra Sun and Moon run, where you have to catch every legendary in a Beast Ball, which has an even lower catch rate than a regular Pokeball on non-Ultra Beast. And for the Ultra Beasts, which are supposed to be easier to catch in a Beast Ball, well, you're gonna have to catch those in a non-Beast Ball. There is so much potential with the legendary Nuzlocke challenge. It's a challenge that would require the utmost patience, skill, and, most importantly, luck. Even if you play absolutely optimally, there's always a chance that one legendary just decides to not stay in its new spherical prison. Some may see this as the challenge's greatest flaw. Others may see it as its most interesting and unforgiving twist of fate. I'm not sure which legendary Nuzlocke I'd want to try first. Platinum seems like one of the most difficult, with 21 legendaries, if you decide to count Rotom. And let's not forget, 5 of those legendaries are roamers. Black and White 2 also has a large amount of legendaries with 15, but it's only got 1 roamer, so it's probably easier than Platinum. However, Black and White 2's larger encounter table will probably take away a lot of control of which Pokemon I can use. Emerald with luxury balls only seems challenging, as the much more limited Pokemon and move selection of Gen 3 would make things really tricky, and not having access to the Master Ball would make it so you would have to really battle the roaming Latios or Latias. And there's always Apricorn only Heart Gold and Soul Silver. I'm not sure what would be more tedious, trying to catch the legendaries or gathering all the Apricorns one at a time. Which one do you think I should do first? Let me know in the comments below, and let me know if you'd want to see comprehensive breakdowns on each game's legendary Nuzlocke. The pre-download of Pokemon TCG Pocket is now live with a release date of October 30th, 2024, right before Halloween. Fitting day to release it because I am scared for this app and what it means for the Pokemon trading card game moving forward. Let's take a look at what we currently know about Pokemon TCG Pocket and see if we should be alarmed. When Pokemon TCG Pocket was first announced, I took a look at the trailer and found some problems. If you want to see my thoughts on the initial trailer, you can check out my video on the subject. But to bring us up to speed, here is my main problem with Pokemon TCG Pocket and the other online version of the Pokemon trading card game. My issue is that they missed the mark on what could make a virtual trading card game engaging. TCG Live and its predecessor TCG Online fail as a meaningful competitive card game because you have to gain cards through purchasing real-life packs and redeeming codes rather than just having access to every card in the meta, meaning that you'll most likely never have the cards you need to build proper decks. Live isn't too bad in this regard, as it does give you a lot of tools to gain cards outside of physical codes and has no microtransactions. However, Live's system of card collecting just doesn't work with a game that revolves around battling real people around the world. Most people you go up against are going to have better access to better cards than you. There's no satisfaction in the sense of progression in getting new cards because the gameplay is only meaningful when you have the best cards to build your deck with. Compare this to the far superior Pokemon trading card game for the Game Boy. That makes you feel a sense of progression as the NPC players you battle against don't automatically have the best cards, so you can properly move up against increasingly difficult opponents. Pokemon TCG Pocket, to its credit, is not going to be as focused on the battles as TCG Live is. The marketing for the game shows that collecting is going to be at the forefront for better and for worse. Look, I don't think there's too much wrong with the concept of collecting cards virtually. Will it ever be as good as putting real cards in a real binder? Of course not. But virtual collections can be fun and satisfying in their own right if done correctly. So, is TCG Pocket doing virtual collections correctly? The answer is, it's a mobile game, so of course not. Without paying for anything, each player will get 2 packs a day. In my previous video on the subject, I mentioned that 2 packs a day was not a lot. And someone in the comments pointed out, what if you got 2 real packs every day for free? Wouldn't that be a lot? And yeah, it would be. 2 real packs a day for free, I'd take that deal. But virtual packs are inherently less valuable than physical cards. And I'm sure a lot of players who get into this game with 2 packs a day are gonna find that pace sluggish, especially if they want to participate in battle. Also, one major difference between real cards and virtual cards is that with real cards you can go out of your way to buy the singles you need to build a deck. Whereas with a virtual game like TCG Pocket, it most likely is not going to let you just buy the cards you need, and you're probably just going to have to cross your fingers and hope that the pack has the meta card that you need. We already have a little bit of insight into how this game is going to be monetized, and it's not looking good. Something you're confirmed to be able to buy is something called Pokégold. Thanks, I hate it. You can buy 5 Pokégold for $1, 15 Pokégold for $3, and 50 Pokégold for $10. Right off the bat, I will commend them for not giving you a better deal if you buy the 50 Pokégold, which would encourage a lot of players to buy more. A common tactic in mobile games. No matter what you buy, it seems that Pokégold is the equivalent of 25 cents. I don't know yet what this Pokégold does, but that doesn't matter because the issue is that there is a fake currency at all. And before you comment, that's how mobile games work, yeah, it's bad when any mobile game does this. The reason I'm singling out TCG Pocket is because I love Pokémon cards and hate to see them handled this way. There's one more thing you can drain your wallet on in Pokemon TCG Pocket. A subscription. Everyone's favorite way of paying for things. For $10 a month, you can get yourself the Premium Pass. Now, I don't know what the Premium Pass does, but there's no way this is gonna be worth the money. Think about it. If you have the Premium Pass for a year, you will be spending $120, the equivalent of 2 Nintendo Switch games. Are you really going to get the same enjoyment out of a year of premium Pokemon TCG Pocket that you would out of 2 full-fledged first-party games? These pricing structures confirm the exact worries I had when this game was announced. This will be a game funded by its whales for its whales. If you don't want to shell out the big bucks, don't even bother playing, cause you'll never be able to compete. At least with TCG Live, there aren't any microtransactions, and someone who is a semi-moderate physical card collector will likely gather up enough code cards to be able to make a decent deck and compete. Again, Live is by no means a perfect way to play the game, and I have my criticisms of its system, but Pocket is a massive step backwards, not a step forward. It's also possible that my criticism of this game is just due to the fact that I don't really like mobile games. And yeah, I don't. Mobile games are designed to be shallow experiences that squeeze out more money from a consumer than they would spend on some of the highest quality AAA games. The only Nintendo mobile game I like is Super Mario Run, because you pay a flat sum of $10 for a full game with a decent amount of content for its price. So yeah, I don't like mobile games, so I don't like that the Pokemon TCG, a product that I have been a consumer of for the majority of my life, can only be represented virtually through computer programs and mobile apps when the Nintendo Switch is right there with no TCG representation at all. Why does the TCG have to be a mobile game? Why hasn't there been a proper Pokemon TCG game, a real game, since the Game Boy era? The answer is probably money. Okay, it's definitely money. A full-fledged Switch game based around the TCG that you pay one flat sum for will never make as much money as gambling addicts, sinking their life savings into premium passes and Pokégold. But I'm gonna complain about it anyway, because this is no good. And the existence of TCG Pocket just means that a real game based around the TCG is never coming, at least not in the near future. Games like TCG Pocket and TCG Live can't coexist with games like Pokemon Trading Card Game for the Game Boy, which is why I think they are a net negative for the consumer. I think that's the phrase we should be considering when we talk about TCG Pocket. Net negative. Sure, there are positives in this game. It'll be fun to collect the cards, the new artworks and immersive cards are cool. You may even be able to get some fun battles out of it, and plenty of dedicated players will get enjoyment out of this game without spending a nickel. Those are positives. But this game is still a net negative, because all those positives will do is enable the Pokemon Company to present the TCG virtually like this, and never give us the Pokemon Trading Card Game video game we deserve. Hey, I hope you enjoyed my scathing comments on this upcoming game. If you'd like to hear something more positive, check out this lighthearted analysis of Rotom's legendary status. Or if you're in the mood for more criticism, check out my original TCG Live trailer analysis. If you like what I do and want to see me do more of it, consider becoming a channel member or checking out my Patreon, link in the description. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time. If there's one thing that Pokemon games are severely lacking, it's Pokeball variety. Think about it. As of Generation 9, we have over 1,000 collectible monsters, yet there are still only around 30 balls that they can call home. I think it's time for this to change, and a recent episode of the new Pokemon Horizon series may have just revealed some new Pokeballs we could be seeing in upcoming games. In order to understand why the prospect of new Pokeballs is something to be excited for, let's establish what a Pokeball actually is. In the game, a Pokeball is the mechanism in which you add new monsters to your team. If you are in a battle with a wild Pokemon, you have the opportunity to use a Pokeball to try and capture it. The thing about catching Pokemon is that it's usually in some part luck-based, as when a Pokeball is thrown, there is a chance the Pokemon can escape. type, and you as a player can do certain actions to make the Pokémon more likely to be captured, such as lowering its health, affecting it with a status condition, or using a more effective type of Pokéball. Beyond the standard Pokéball, there are other more effective Pokéballs, with the most basic upgrades being the Great Ball and the Ultra Ball, which make you a little more likely to succeed in a capture. However, the Ultra Ball doesn't always give you the highest chance of capturing your target, as there are other kinds of Pokéballs that can be even stronger than the Ultra Ball, if used under specific circumstance. For example, the Net Ball has a much higher chance of capture, but only on water and bug-type Pokémon, and a Dusk Ball has a much higher chance of capture, but only in the nighttime or in a cave. There are even some Pokéballs that, instead of affecting catch rate, have an effect on the Pokémon it was captured in. For example, the Heal Ball fully heals the Pokémon captured within it, meaning any damage or status conditions inflicted against the wild Pokémon you captured will be healed once it's added to the party. There's also the Luxury Ball and Friend Ball that make the Pokémon captured within them gain friendship points faster. These effects are incredibly minor, as healing is usually readily available after battles anyway, and friendship is only useful for evolving certain Pokémon and increasing the power of one attack. However, it doesn't matter that the effects of the Heal Ball, Luxury Ball, or Friend Ball aren't game-breaking. What matters is that they just do something a little different. These different Pokéballs have a positive effect on the gameplay, as they encourage the player to stock up on all these different kinds of items, and encourages them to think about which ball is best to use in each encounter. The fun of different Pokéballs isn't so much that they make any aspect of the game easier. In most playthroughs, you can get along just fine using Ultra Balls. What makes all these different Pokéballs special is that they give just a little bit of variety to the catching process, and once they're used on the Pokémon, they become a core part of that Pokémon's identity, since the ball a Pokémon is caught in is displayed right next to its name, and also seen when the Pokémon is sent into battles. Because of this one little detail, I always feel encouraged to have Pokémon on my team caught in different Pokéballs. Lunatone in a Great Ball? Whatever. Lunatone in a Moon Ball? Spectacular! Different Pokéballs are an aspect of the game that is really important to me, and for some reason, it's not important to Game Freak. For some reason, Game Freak just doesn't add new Pokéballs to games anymore. While you can find some examples of new Pokéballs being added after Generation 4, like the Dream Ball, the Beast Ball, or the Hisuian Pokéballs, there has not been any easily obtainable new Pokéballs added to the main series since Generation 4, which was 17 years ago. And of the Pokéballs that are still available, Game Freak is incredibly stingy with a lot of them, especially the Apricorn Balls. Seriously, I don't know why Game Freak only allows you to get one of each Apricorn Ball per game, pretty much. They aren't even all that special. They just look cool, and I want to use them. It's downright cruel of them to make them so rare. For some reason, Game Freak is incredibly particular about different kinds of Pokéballs being included in the games. I don't know why this is, and I've complained about it plenty of times in other videos. But in this video, I want to be more optimistic, and I think I have a reason to, since we just got a big hint towards new Pokéballs being added to the series. The Pokémon Horizons episode, titled Orla and the Pokéball Smith, has a few scenes focused on these new Pokéball designs. Now, the Pokémon anime is no stranger to showing off Pokéballs that never actually got added to the main series games. Just look at the GS Ball or Mewtwo's Clone Balls. However, there's something about the Pokéballs featured in this episode that really make me think they're gonna be used in the games. There are 6 Pokéballs that can be seen in this episode that have never appeared in the games. Let's start with the Ancient Pokéball. Now, this isn't the first episode of this show that the Ancient Pokéball appeared in. It's actually a major part of the plot, most notably as the home of the shiny Rayquaza that all the main characters are trying to find. Judging from how it's presented in the show, the Ancient Pokéball is the ball that seems the least able to be translated to actual gameplay. Its main purpose is to be a cool, mysterious Pokéball that holds on to legendaries. I suppose in-game it could have a purpose similar to that of the Beast Ball, where it only works effectively against the legendary Pokémon it's trying to capture. There's also this Silver Pokéball. I don't think there's any indication of what this Pokéball does in universe, but there were many of these Pokéballs produced in the episode, showing us that they aren't as rare as the ancient Pokéball. If a Pokéball like this is introduced in the game, I think it's likely you'll be able to get many of them in a repeatable fashion, such as through buying them at shops. What this ball could do in game, I'm not quite sure. It gives me luxury ball vibes, so maybe it can improve a certain characteristic of any Pokemon captured within it. Perhaps it grants a Pokemon its hidden ability, or it makes it gain EVs faster. The next 4 Pokeballs are all shown off in a row. First is the Rocket Ball, a Pokeball that flies super fast towards its target. Then we see the Boomerang Ball, which, well, that one's kind of self-explanatory. Then there's the Bomb Ball, which explodes if you hold it for too long. And lastly, we see the Chase Ball, which tracks down the nearest Pokemon and tries to capture it. Now, these last 4 Pokeballs have something in common. Rather than having an effect on a specific Pokemon's catch rate, each of these Pokeballs have a different way of being thrown. With Pokemon Legends ZA right around the corner, I think it's pretty likely that all 4 of these Pokeballs will appear in that game, as they fit in quite well with the Legends gameplay of actually aiming and throwing the Pokeball. They even featured a Hisuian Pokeball in the scene that these Pokeballs were revealed. How is that not a hint? While I am almost certain these Pokeballs will appear in Legends ZA, I would be pretty disappointed if that's the only place they appear in, and I'm really crossing my fingers these Pokeballs will be in Generation 10 as well. In order for these Pokeballs to work in a non-Legends game, they obviously would need some kind of effect other than how they are thrown, since in mainline Pokemon games you don't actually aim the Pokeball. One possibility is that Generation 10 changes this, and Legends-esque Pokeball aiming is adopted across the entire series. But I also think that these Pokeballs could have added effects beyond just how they're thrown. Perhaps the Bomb Ball works better on fire types. Perhaps the Rocket Ball works better on flying type. Little details like that can go a long way. And if these Pokeballs really are Legends exclusive, can we at least please get some proper new Pokeballs in Generation 10? Maybe the Silver Pokeball I mentioned earlier will get to be a main series Pokeball. My worst nightmare is that Generation 10 has the same Nest Ball, Quick Ball, and Repeat Balls available in their shops with the once per game Apricorn Balls and no new Pokeballs at all! Game Freak, please, add some new Pokeballs already. But what do you think? Will these Pokeballs be added to Legends ZA? Do you also want new Pokeballs? Let me know in the comments below. If you've ever played Pokémon Emerald, you may have come across these buildings, but you probably didn't go inside. These are the battle tents, and their purpose is to give the player a taste of the upcoming battle frontier, a major selling point of Pokémon Emerald. While most players forgot the battle tents, I, for one, think that there could have been more done with the battle frontier's little brothers. So let's analyze the battle tents, figure out their missed potential, and propose some possible improvements. The battle frontier is one of the most loved parts of the Pokémon series, and is something that fans are hoping will return to the series one day. What makes the battle frontier so special is that it gives the player the opportunity to engage in unlimited battles against a large possible pool of Pokémon, making the game fundamentally endless. The battle frontier is more than just more battling. It also includes different kinds of battle facilities that subvert standard gameplay into new and unique challenges. While the battle frontier is accessible in the post-game, the battle tents become accessible between badges 2 and 4. Each tent is a miniature version of a battle frontier facility where the player engages in 3 battles instead of the standard 7. The pool of Pokémon that you battle is also much smaller, only including Pokémon from the standard Hoenn Pokédex and only Pokémon of a modest power level. There are 3 battle tents. The first is the Factory Tent, located in Slateport City. The factory tent is based off the battle factory. In this facility, instead of using your own Pokémon, you get to choose 3 Pokémon out of a random pool of 6. After each battle, you get the choice to switch out one of your current team members with one of the team members of your most recent opponent. If you ask me, I think there should be a version of this in the early game of every Pokémon game. The factory tent is an excellent way to try out new Pokémon and strategies that you wouldn't have considered before. Depending on which town you visit first, the next tent could be the Arena tent, located in Fall Arbor Town. Unlike the previous tent, in this tent you use your own Pokémon. There are 2 main differences between these battles and normal battles. The first difference is that you can't switch your Pokémon, and the order in which your Pokémon are sent out is fixed, meaning if your first Pokémon goes down, the second is immediately sent out, instead of a choice between the second and third. The other big difference in this kind of battle is that after 3 turns have passed, if no Pokémon has been knocked out, a judging will occur. Pokémon are judged by 3 criteria. Mind, meaning how many offensive moves it used, body, its remaining HP, and skill, how many moves it actually landed. The loser of this judging will be knocked out, regardless of its remaining HP. If it's a tie, both Pokémon are knocked out. This sort of battle doesn't succeed in subverting regular battles very well. In fact, it actively makes battles more straightforward and less interesting. From not being allowed to switch and being disincentivized from using strategy moves because of the judging, your best bet for success here is standard brute force. But if you thought this battle facility takes away strategizing, just wait till you see the next one. The Verdant Turf Battle Tent is based on the Battle Palace. The main gimmick here is that you don't get to choose which attacks your Pokémon uses. Instead, your Pokémon chooses one of their own moves to use from the moves that they have. At first glance, this seems like a terrible idea for a battle facility. It's actually not too much of a disaster gameplay-wise. I'd say its biggest crime as a game mechanic is just that it's kinda boring. Any standard Pokémon team with decent attacking moves is going to find success here, and you as the player aren't going to feel like you did much to earn it. Unlike the previous battle tent we talked about, you can at least choose to switch out your Pokémon, but that's the only strategizing you can actually do. The choice of attacks the Pokémon makes is actually not completely random. It is decided in part by that Pokémon's nature, with some natures wanting to be more offensive and others trying to be more strategic. While this is a cool concept, did Game Freak really expect anyone to go out of their way to look for certain natures just for this? For the post-game version of the Battle Palace that grants a major game achievement for completion, I can understand figuring out all this nature stuff. But for a mid-game optional challenge with an extremely minor prize? Come on, who will go through all that trouble? So those are the 3 battle tents. Now that we know what they are, what's wrong with them? So, of the 3 battle facilities, I think most players found themselves engaging with the factory tent at least once while completely ignoring the arena and palace tents. The battle factory was a perfect choice for the first battle tent, and I wouldn't change that at all. However, the arena and palace tents just aren't the most interesting subversions of the standard battle system. The arena tent is alright, but honestly, it could have just been replaced with the standard battle tower, and that would have been better. The palace tent is even worse, as not choosing your Pokemon's attacks is just a fundamentally flawed way to play the game. I think the Verdant Turf Battle Tent should have instead included a smaller version of a more interesting battle facility. My vote would be the Battle Pike, a battle facility that sets the player against separate pathways. Some heal your team, some inflict status conditions, some make you battle trainers, and some even make you fight wild Pokemon. No, you can't catch them. A miniature version of the Battle Pike would have gotten players super excited to get to the battle frontier later in the game. This flaw also only applies to the arena and palace tents since you use your own Pokémon. In these battle tents, the opposing trainer's Pokémon will either be the same level as your highest level Pokémon, or they will be level 30 if your highest level Pokémon is level 30 or less. This was an extremely poor design choice because it makes it so the player functionally can't engage with the battle tent until their Pokémon are level 30. When the player reaches the battle tent for the first time, their Pokémon will be hovering around level 20 at best. This means that you'll have to backtrack to these locations in order to properly play them. And since it goes off your highest leveled team member, you have to make sure all 3 Pokemon on your team are the same level. So if you have one Pokemon of even a slightly higher level, you wouldn't want to use it, as it would bring down the rest of your team. I'm not sure if Gen 3 just didn't have the technology to change your Pokemon's level for certain battle facilities. In Generation 4 onward, Pokemon are automatically moved to level 50 for battle facilities. So it may be possible that with the GBA's technology, they just couldn't control the level cap. Even if that were true, I just don't understand why they didn't make the lowest level 20 instead of 30, so that players can try these battle facilities when they actually reach them for the first time. The biggest flaw of the battle tents is they give the player little reward for completing them. In the Battle Frontier, completing enough battles earns you BP, a currency that can be used in the Battle Frontier only for exclusive items and move tutor move. BP is also flawed as a reward because you need to do an unarceously amount of battles in order to actually buy anything with it. But in concept, it is a good reward system. Beyond BP, you also get medals for defeating each battle facility's bosses, with getting all 7 gold medals being one of the highest honors in Pokemon. What are the battle tent's rewards? 1 full heal for the factory tent, 1 hyper potion for the arena tent, and 1 nest ball for the palace tent. Sure, these rewards only take 3 battles to get, but come on! Who is playing these battles just for the prizes? Status condition healing items aren't exactly hard to come by, and grinding out even 3 full heals would be a massive waste of time. The Hyper Potion might be the best reward of the bunch, since you'd be getting a powerful healing item earlier in the game than you would normally receive one. However, at this point, it would just be a waste to use an item that heals 200 HP, as none of your Pokemon are going to have health that high. By the time a Hyper Potion would actually be necessary in the game, you'd already be able to buy them, and you'd already have enough money to buy as many as you need. And then there's the Nest Ball. Not a bad item, but definitely not something I would see as a prize for achieving something you had to go so out of your way for. The main issue with all 3 of these prizes is that they are disposable and can be purchased from regular shops. They get 1 use, maybe, and then are forgotten. The prize doesn't stick with you as a player. It doesn't remind you of the experience you went through to get it. They just blend in with the other items you have in your bag. This could have been marginally improved by making it so you could get 5 of each disposable item instead of just 1, but I think we deserve even better than that. Back in my video on Johto's bug catching contest, which if you haven't seen it, you should, link in the description, I also thought that the prizes were underwhelming. However, I still think that the bug catching contest succeeded because the prize was not the item it gave you, but the Pokemon you captured. The battle tents should have taken a similar approach by rewarding players with Pokemon. Pokemon Emerald put the last of the Generation 2 Pokemon on the GBA, making it possible to complete the Pokédex only using GBA games. Some of these final Gen 2 Pokemon, like Mareep, Shuckle, and Houndour, should have been prizes for the battle tents. This would have motivated players to actually play the battle tents and then would give them something that they can always remember that experience with. Every time you used any of these prize Pokemon in the game, you would remember how you got it. I think the biggest problem with the battle tents is that they were an afterthought by the developers, who didn't realize the potential they had in what they were creating. Having a battle facility based around being earlier in the game can actually be really interesting if implemented correctly. Unfortunately, the battle tent's flaws doom them to obscurity. I'd still encourage you to revisit Emerald and play the factory tent. It really is its own unique experience. It's basically the battle factory, but at the strength level of the early to mid game. I think it's actually pretty underrated. It's not difficult by any means, but interesting. Once you've conquered dragons and champions, you can drop on by and remember what it was like to use attacks like Harden and Bide. But what do you think of the battle tents? Did you play them? Do you think there's more they could have done? Let me know in the comments below. Pokémon TCG Pocket is a mobile Pokémon card game with a major focus towards building a digital collection. There are lots of different ways to obtain cards in the game beyond opening your allotted 1 pack every 12 hours. There's one card obtaining method that stuck out to me. It just kind of rubbed me the wrong way. Now, with a game like this, you might think my issue with Wonder Pick is that it's predatory in terms of monetization. But that's not actually the problem I have with it at all. My biggest issue with Wonder Pick is that it's just poorly thought out. What is Wonder Pick? How does it work, and how does its implementation in Pokemon TCG Pocket bring to light some of the game's major flaws? Wonder Pick is actually one of 3 main ways to obtain cards in Pokemon TCG Pocket. The main way to get cards in Pokemon TCG Pocket is to open booster packs, of which you can open one 5-card pack for free every 12 hours. There are ways to speed up the pack opening with these little Pikachu hourglasses, with each hourglass taking 1 hour off towards your next pack, allowing you to open more than 2 a day. While the main way to get these hourglasses is to spend sweet money, there is ample opportunity to get these hourglasses by playing the game normally and racking up achievements. Another way to get cards is to spend what are called pack points, which allow you to purchase, I think, potentially every card in the game. Pack points are just about the worst way to obtain cards, as you only get 5 pack points for every pack you open, and the amount of pack points you need to get cards is more than that, much more. A run-of-the-mill common will set you back 35 pack points. An uncommon, think first stage evolutions and supporter cards, will cost you 70. Rarer final stage evolutions will cost you 150, standard EXs will cost you 500, and all those fancy special art cards will cost pretty high as well, ranging from 400 for the regular special art cards all the way up to a whopping 2,500 pack points for the fancy schmancy gold cards. I don't really take issue with the special art cosmetic cards costing so many pack points. They're the big ticket items, and all of them have less flashy, mechanically identical versions. The regular cards, and I count the standard EXs as regular cards, are far too expensive if you are thinking in the context of fair deck building amongst the entire player base. I was lucky enough to get myself some Blastoise cards, and when I was making a deck, I realized I haven't pulled a War Turtle. I thought to myself, well, that's no big deal. It's an uncommon, I should probably be able to use some pack points to get some. However, 2 War Turtle would have cost me 140 pack points, nearly 30 packs worth. And that's just for 2 measly cards that aren't even the main cards in the deck. So with opening packs being pretty much fully random and pack points being too ineffective, surely a feature as optimistically named as Wonder Pick would help me get the cards I need, right? Here is how Wonder Pick works. On the Wonder Pick page, you take a look at some packs that were opened by real players in the recent past. If you happen to covet any of thy neighbor's Pokémon cards, you may be tempted to Wonder Pick. However, Wonder Picking does not grant you all of the cards in the pack, obviously. No, the way Wonder Pick works is that once you decide on a pack that looks good, you then are randomly given one of the 5 cards in that pack. Do you see the problem here? I see several. First off, Wonder Picks have a cost, Wonder Hearts, which is a name I made up because I think it sounds better than Wonder Stamina. I don't know why, I just hate the use of the term stamina in that context in mobile games, but I digress. So, a Wonder Pick can cost between 1 to 4 Wonder Hearts. What a Wonder Pick costs is decided by how rare the rarest card in the pack is. And the thing about trading card game packs is that, well, there's usually only 1 rare card in a given pack, with the rest being your run-of-the-mill commons and uncommons. This means that 80% of the time, whether you spend 1 heart or 4, you're walking away with just a regular card. And in case you didn't hear me right, that's just 1 Wonder Heart every 12 hours, not filling up the whole 5 max Wonder Hearts every 12 hours. You want to try for an EX? Wait a day and a half for a 1 in 5 chance. That means that statistically speaking, you're likely to get 1 EX in the span of a week using Wonder Pick. Now, to make things a little better, there is a similar hourglass system to the packs with Wonder Pick, but that only takes you so far. Alright, So that's not the best way to get EXs and rare cards. Maybe I can use Wonder Pick to get some other smaller cards that are important to the current deck I'm building. If that's the case, you are still going up against those pesky 1 in 5 odds, and there are only so many Wonder Picks to choose from. So even if you're lucky, you'll only get one 20% chance to get the common card you want. And maybe that common card is in a pack with an EX in it, which will make you spend more Wonder Hearts. There's one more cherry on top of this bad game mechanics sundae: rewind clocks. When you scroll a little bit more down the Wonder Pick menu, you're gonna find some darkened Wonder Picks. These Wonder Picks are the same as other Wonder Picks, except you have to use a whole other item called the rewind clock to unexpire the expired Wonder Pick. So you're telling me that you set an arbitrary expiration date just so you could make up an in-game item that I have to use if I happen to see a card I want in the expired Wonder Pick, which I will then only have a 20% chance of getting. The rewind clock, to my knowledge, is not an item you can buy with real money. At least that's what I think is the case. Let me know if I missed something. So if the Wonder Clock isn't something that people are spending their real money on, why have the expiration system at all? One way to fix the Wonder Pick system is to charge you the Wonder Hearts after the card is chosen randomly. That way, you only lose 3 Wonder Hearts if you actually got the EX card you had your eye on. You still would have to have at least minimum 3 hearts in order to even try the Wonder Pick, however, which would be the only catch. It's still not a perfect system, and I've got another idea that would actually be even better, but you'll have to wait until the end of the video to hear it. I can see what they were going for with Wonder Pick. I do. It's a nice feeling when you actually do pick out the card you wanted, and it's a way to build up your collection in a more intentional way than random packs. But its poor execution doomed it to be a frustrating and near useless part of the game. So now that we know how Wonder Pick is flawed, let's get into the reason why all this really matters. Let's start off this section of the video by talking about Pokemon TCG Pocket's battle system. It's actually pretty good. I'm surprised I'm even saying that. I sat down and played some Pokemon TCG Pocket over on my second channel, Game Cubicle Plays, and totally went into it thinking the battle system was going to be far too simple and boring, and well, you can watch that video and see me realize how wrong I was in real time. Link in the description. Now, TCG Pocket's battle system is simple. The decks are only 20 cards, it removes the prize cards in favor of a 3-point-to-win knockout system, and it replaces energy cards with a free energy you can attach once a turn. While I do hope TCG Pocket eventually adds a bigger battle function more akin to the traditional Pokemon TCG, what we have right now is a well-paced, strategically challenging, and mentally engaging little card game. In my other videos that criticize Pokemon TCG Pocket leading up to its launch, link to those videos in the description, by the way, one of the biggest problems I foresaw with the game was that players who are willing to pay were going to get all the best cards and put together the best decks, turning the game into a pay-to-win nightmare. Did this fear come to pass? Yes, absolutely. But not as bad as I thought. The game being simpler and cards being relatively accessible does mitigate a lot of these problems, and the game does offer you battles against CPU opponents, which is something I asked for in my initial reveal video, so credit where credit is due to Pokemon TCG Pocket for that. And for real-life opponents, the game does have an option for you to say if you're an expert or beginner player. Not sure what's keeping jerk experts from saying they are beginners, but sure, honor system, that always works with a mass audience. To bring this all back to Wonder Pick, the system of getting cards is without a doubt the biggest flaw of the battle system, and it keeps me from properly wanting to engage with playing against other players until I build up a proper meta deck, which is gonna take me a while because I don't really feel like investing into premium passes and Pokégold. The idea of this being both a collecting game and a game where you battle real-life people is a problem because those types of games are at odds with each other. Collecting games are most fun when you don't have all the collectibles because it gives you something to aspire to, whereas competitive games are most fun when everyone is on an equal playing field so that the competitors with the most skill feel like they really earn the win. They're mutually exclusive, and to nurture one aspect of the game will harm the other. TCG Pocket chose to nurture the collecting side more, but it actually didn't neglect the competitive side as much as I thought, and they really almost made something great here. I think that TCG Pocket really could have benefited from embracing allowing their players to access good cards and make good decks pretty much immediately, and they could have used the Wonder Pick system to do so. How about instead of Wonder Pick picking random cards, it picks less rare cards related to cards you already have, with a 100% chance of getting them. And you can even tie it to the good cards that you already pulled in the packs. Like, I got Blastoise EX, well, why can't I use my Wonder Hearts to nab some War Turtles? Wonder Pick should also be focused around getting the much needed supporter cards that can make or break decks. Something I noticed while going up against real players who clearly spent money on the game is that they had supporter cards that I just didn't get yet. The game needs to make these more middle-of-the-road cards like evolutions and supporter cards more available immediately, because that will actually make the most difference for newer players. Let it take a while for me to build up all my EXs. I was expecting that with a game like this, but I should have my stage 1s and support cards that I need to get right into some battles. That way, the game can still be reasonably competitive, and you'll have some fun chase cards to look forward to. But those are my thoughts on Wonder Pick and TCG Pocket as a whole. I'm actually surprised to say that I enjoy the game more than I thought I would. I still have my problems with it, and still agree with the things I said in my previous videos, but as far as what I speculated would happen, the game turned out as a decent but still massively flawed little Pokemon TCG experience. But what do you think of it? Do you enjoy the game? Do you think Wonder Pick doesn't work? Let me know in the comments below. Pokemon Emerald's Battle Pyramid is already one of the most difficult challenges in the entire Pokemon franchise. Naturally, I look at this and ask myself, what if it was harder? There are two major differences to the Battle Pyramid compared to a typical battle facility. Here, you can encounter wild Pokemon and pick up items, but the only items you can use are ones obtained within the pyramid. The wild Pokemon cannot be captured since there are no Pokéballs to be found. But what if there was a way to smuggle in some Pokéballs? Could wild Pokemon be captured then? And if they were, could we, with a few self-imposed rules, create what may be one of the most difficult challenges in Pokemon history? So, a little background on the Battle Pyramid. Like any other battle facility, you start by choosing 3 Pokemon to bring with you. However, instead of taking you straight into a battle, you find yourself in a dark room. As you go around, you may encounter either a trainer, an item, some wild Pokemon, or, if you're lucky, a blue tile that takes you to the next floor. Trainers in the Battle Pyramid only have 1 Pokemon on their team. Doesn't sound too scary, right? Well, it's not the trainers I would worry about. It's the wild Pokemon. But what's so scary about wild Pokemon? Can't you just run? No. See, when you try to run away from a Pokemon, sometimes it will say, can't escape. And when that happens, you stay in the battle and lose your turn. In the regular game, can't escape is an annoying inconvenience that might cause you to have to backtrack to a Pokemon Center. In the Battle Pyramid, it could be a death sentence. Items are extremely limited. You may get yourself a few hyper potions, revives, and maybe even a useful held item, but resources are slim in the pyramid. Every hit counts because damage is not easily recovered, and status conditions could stick on a Pokemon for a long time. Since wild Pokemon appear in the pyramid and you have access to some items, I was always fascinated with the idea of catching the Battle Pyramid Pokemon. Since no Pokeball spawn here, under normal circumstances, the game does not allow you to catch Battle Pyramid Pokemon. But that didn't stop me from bending the rules. The method I used to get Ultra Balls into the Battle Pyramid bag was to use the Game Shark codes, Mod Shop, buy all Pokeballs, and, because I'm a cheapskate, free items. The way the Mod Shop works is it makes the player interact with a shopkeeper from anywhere on the map. Then, the buy all Pokeballs code makes the shop inventory consist of every Pokeball. There apparently does exist a way to get Pokeballs into the Battle Pyramid without using cheats, but that particular glitch is extremely convoluted and complicated. But just so you know, you can actually do this challenge without cheating at all. However, whether you glitch the game or use an external cheating device, getting Pokeballs into the Battle Pyramid is still contrary to the developer's intentions. So honestly, I don't really see a difference. So once you get some Pokeballs into your bag, you can indeed use them to catch some wild Pokemon in the Battle Pyramid. But some strange things happen when you catch these Pokemon that were once unintended to be captured. Since you take 3 Pokemon into the Battle Pyramid, the first 3 Pokémon you capture go into the last 3 slots of the party, meaning that if you smuggle in Pokéballs, you can get a full team of 6. However, once you leave the battle pyramid, your team reverts to what it was before you entered, meaning those extra 3 team members get erased from the game completely. So, if you want to actually keep any battle pyramid encounters, you would have to fill your team so your next capture would automatically transfer to the PC, and just accept that the first 3 Pokémon you meet here will get turned to dust the moment you leave the facility. Also, for some reason, it says that the Pokémon were met at level 5 regardless of what level they were captured at. I am unsure why that is, but thought it would be interesting to mention. Some of the Pokémon you encounter here cannot be encountered anywhere else in Pokémon Emerald. You can even find final evolutions that never appeared in the wild by this point in the series. Jolteon, Vileplume, and even Gengar, to name a few. The pool of possible encounters is actually massive, with 20 different themed rounds including all sorts of different creatures. Also, if your team is level 100, the Pokémon encountered will range from the early 80s all the way to level 99, which is pretty much unheard of for most wild captures. However, these Pokémon are not going to be as good as a Pokémon that a skilled player would want to bring into the pyramid. While they have high levels relative to the rest of the series, they are always guaranteed to be a lower level than the trainers in the pyramid. They also aren't guaranteed to have the most competitive move pools. They can sometimes have strategically poorer moves, like, for example, Thunder instead of Thunderbolt. Some of these Pokémon don't even have a full 4 moves. Since TMs don't appear anywhere in the pyramid and you can't level up, their movesets are completely fixed and cannot be altered in any way during the challenge. If you decide to use your extra Pokémon in the Battle Pyramid challenge, all you really do is give yourself a slight advantage by having more team members. But you'll really only focus on your main 3 Pokémon you brought with you, since they'll likely be a lot better than the wild Pokémon you find. I initially thought that catching wild Pokémon in the Battle Pyramid was nothing more than a fun novelty where you got some Pokémon you weren't supposed to. But a part of me was just sure that there was more to this. And then I realized that with a few self-imposed rules, you can turn the Battle Pyramid into one of the most insane challenges I have ever come up with in the Pokémon franchise. So, the main issue with capturing Battle Pyramid wild Pokémon is that there is little incentive for the player to actually use these Pokémon in the Battle Pyramid battles, which defeats the purpose of capturing them in the first place. My first idea was to use another Game Shark code that allows you to open the PC anywhere on the map so I could deposit my outside Pokémon and have my entire team be Pyramid Pokémon. This is a serviceable idea, but I think it loses just a little bit of the spirit of the Battle Pyramid. I really don't want to just turn this into a Pokémon roguelike. I want to enhance the difficulty of the Battle Pyramid by using unorthodox methods. In order to do that, we should use Pokémon that are from the outside. However, those Pokémon need to have restrictions put on them so that the Pyramid Pokémon the player captures can be the real star of the show. So, here is the main rule of the Battle Pyramid Catching Challenge. The Pokémon you bring into the pyramid can have no attacks or abilities that can cause opposing Pokémon to take damage. This not only means that you can't have attacking moves, but you also can't have status moves, or moves like Leech Seed that drain HP, or anything that triggers sandstorms or hail. Also, no moves that end wild battles like Teleport or Whirlwind are allowed either. If any of the Pokemon you brought into the pyramid use Struggle, it's an auto forfeit. However, the Pokemon that you capture in the pyramid can use whatever attacks they want, including Struggle. So, if half your team can't deal damage, what can they do? Baton Pass. In case you didn't know, Baton Pass is a move that allows you to switch your current Pokemon with another, but retain any stat changes during the switch. So if your Pokemon has attack raised and uses Baton Pass, the next Pokemon will have its attack raised as well. And yes, you can Baton Pass a substitute. The reason I think Baton Pass is such an important part of this challenge is that it helps mitigate the lower levels your new Battle Pyramid captures will be at. While level 88 and level 100 seem close together, Pokémon can be extremely unforgiving to that sort of level disparity. So, since the Pokémon you capture will be the only ones with moves capable of taking away HP from the opponent, you'll be encouraged to use them with these boosted stats. Another important move you can make use of is Wish, which heals whatever Pokémon is on the field at the end of the turn after it was used. This can be used to heal any member of your team if you play your cards right. Another important rule is that when you enter the pyramid, you'll only be able to add the first 3 Pokémon you capture to your team, as any Pokémon caught afterwards will be sent to the PC. As such, it should go without saying that you can't just throw Pokéballs to catch a Pokémon after your first 3 just so it ends the battle. I guess you could make an exception if it's a shiny. Yes, the battle pyramid can spawn shinies. Yes, it's dumb to spawn shinies where you aren't usually allowed to catch them. Since the Pokémon encountered in the pyramid get stronger as you progress, you will have to make the tough decision of whether or not to fill your team early or wait for something stronger. You are going to be highly encouraged to catch at least 1 Pokémon on the first floor, since if you encounter a trainer before capturing anything, you will automatically lose due to having no attacks. This means you'll probably have at least 1 subpar Pokémon of the only 3 you can add. As far as which Pokéballs to use, I think Ultra Balls, while a tad milquetoast, is the happy medium. Master Balls would make it a little bit easier since you wouldn't have to worry about the opposing Pokémon attacking you as you try to capture it, or if you want to make things even harder, you could restrict yourself to standard Pokéballs, or luxury balls if you want to be fancy. Standard Pokéballs would make you really have to consider weakening the wild Pokémon, which would be a problem because it would join your team with low HP and healing is not readily available. So what is this challenge really like? How hard is it? I tested it out a bit over on my second channel, Game Cubicle Plays, link in the description to that video by the way. But let me tell you, this challenge, it's a nightmare. The amount of things that can go wrong is astounding. I've never been more afraid of the term can't escape in my life. The smallest crack in your strategy can destroy your run. Getting poisoned? Over. Hurt yourself in confusion? Over. Accidentally get seen by a trainer because you were walking too fast? Over. But beyond all that, the times where a battle does go your way produces a feeling of euphoria that I just do not often feel in Pokemon games. The path to victory is so narrow that actually crossing it feels really special. While this challenge is an RNG torture house, there are a few things that you as the player have control of. The first thing you can do is bring good support Pokemon. Your options for this are few and far between, but finding the ideal Pokemon to use is key to victory. You are able to find out what sort of wild Pokemon will spawn in the pyramid before you enter, so you can have a revolving door of baton passers, each with unique immunities ready to face any challenge. There might even be some times where baton passers might not be the best choice. Since baton pass isn't the most common move, there could also be situations where you may want to forego using a baton passer in favor of a simple walling Pokemon, such as a Blissey that can reliably tank hits while you attempt to run away. Also, you should strongly consider bringing a pickup Pokemon, because pickup still works in the battle pyramid and can get you some very useful items. Another thing you need to do is practice what I call mindful pyramid sweeping. This means keeping track of where you've been in the pyramid so you don't have to backtrack to find the exit. The more walking, the more encounters you have to deal with, and every encounter is a chance to fail the run. You also need to walk 1 tile at a time in case a trainer appears in the smallest corner of your sightlines. Plenty of trainer battles are unavoidable, but the ones that are avoidable count. But even if you do everything right, you may still lose because the odds just weren't in your favor. And remember, in order to get the battle pyramid's coveted gold symbol, you have to conquer 70 floors of the pyramid. And every 7 floors, your captured battle pyramid Pokemon reset, and you have to hope you get at least somewhat decent encounters next time. And since this is a battle frontier facility, if you lose even once, you start the entire thing from square one. There are also 2 boss battles, one after 21 floors and another at the final floor. The first boss battle uses a team of all 3 Regis, and the second boss battle uses a team of all 3 legendary birds. So, good luck with that. You know what? Since we're already getting nuts, there's actually 20 different rounds of the Battle Pyramid, each with its own pool of unforgiving Pokémon. So if you really want to call yourself a Battle Pyramid master, you definitely need to do all 20. One of these rounds focuses on Pokémon that use Explosion. Good luck with that. So really, the only true way to complete this challenge is to go through 140 floors of the Battle Pyramid without losing once. I don't think I could ever do this crazy challenge. I'm pretty much the comes up with the crazy game challenges but never does them guy by now, but I would love to see if there's someone out there so dedicated to the Battle Pyramid to actually attempt this. If anyone does attempt this challenge, all I ask is that you give me credit for coming up with the idea. But since I only got as far as floor 6 when I attempted this, the title of World's First Pokémon Emerald Battle Pyramid King is still open, and it could be you. Forgive me, Arceus, for I have done wrong. I did use GameShark and Action Replay codes to access special event Pokémon when I didn't actually go to the event to obtain them. But before you judge me, I ask you, what was I supposed to do? Just sit back and be okay with not having cool Pokémon like Deoxys and Darkrai? Just because my mom wasn't able to take me to Toys R Us in the brief window they were giving them out? For a lot of you out there, special event Pokémon were your gateway to cheating devices. And I'm sure it didn't stop there. After you got yourself Mew and Jirachi, I'm sure you did lots of crazy stuff like give yourself shinies and raise everything to level 100. But once you did the game perhaps feel a little ruined? Let's examine external cheating devices. Take a look at how they were used in Pokémon games and ask ourselves if it's possible to cheat responsibly. A mythical Pokémon is a Pokémon that, while it exists within the game's code, cannot be accessed in any way while normally playing through the game. The only official way to get these Pokémon in your game would be through what is called a Pokémon event. Nowadays, these events are done over Wi-Fi, so as long as you're active in the game, you can pretty reliably get yourself every one. But back in my day, you could only get these events at physical locations, usually a GameStop or a Toys R Us. If you were lucky enough to have a Pokémon event line up with your parents' schedule, you would either be given the event Pokémon itself, boring, or be given a key item that allows you to encounter the event Pokémon in-game, which I like to call the cool way. As a kid, I thought event Pokémon were a really stupid concept. Do I still think that today? A little. I think they were a necessary evil. Event Pokémon are a dumb gameplay concept because I think it is poor game design to have parts of your game that can only be accessed for a certain amount of time. I much prefer it when games have longevity. If someone experienced Pokémon Emerald today, or even just a few years after it came out and the events had come and gone, there would be something fundamentally missing about the game. In fact, Pokémon Emerald has 5 different event legendary encounters. But to play Giratina's advocate, mythical Pokémon played a tremendous role in shaping Pokémon's popularity. Back in Generation 1, which was before my time, Mew was a major talking point of the game. Video games before the modern internet were ripe for rumors. If you beat Ocarina of Time this specific way, Link gets a gun. Here's how you unlock Luigi in Mario 64. Those rumors were nonsense, of course. But then you have this one thing that sounds like a rumor. This 151st Pokémon, mentioned in passing in a few bits of game lore. This special Pokémon can actually be added to your team. If Mew didn't actually exist in the game, that would sound as outlandish as any other playground rumor. But Mew was in the game. It was just far enough below the surface that it promoted a lot of intrigue. Now, this mythical Pokémon marketing strategy wasn't something that mattered to a 10-year-old me, because I felt like I missed out on all these cool event Pokémon that were distributed years ago, and I was willing to do whatever it took to get my hands on them. So I got myself a GameShark for my Game Boy Advance and an Action Replay for my DS. As a kid, I actually thought that these cheating devices were illegal. I had some friends lend them to me, and I assumed that they got them off the black market or something. I also heard that they could break your game, so I proceeded with great caution. I justified to myself this little bit of rule bending by saying that it was the Pokemon Company's fault. I had to debase myself with these cheating devices. If they designed their game properly, I would have gladly played by the rules. And as I put that action replay into my DS, I told myself I would do nothing more than grab the special Pokemon I felt I was owed. I said I would do no other cheating. Of course, that didn't happen. Now that I had the taste of the power that came with my Game Shark and Action Replay, I just couldn't stop. I was hooked. The next cheat code I tried out was walk through walls, and I had just a swell time walking through trees and mountains to go wherever I wanted. But that got old quick. The next cheat code I used was to give myself every TM in the game. I didn't think it was fair that there was only one Earthquake TM on the ground, and the amount of BP I needed to get another one was just unreasonable. I wanted everyone on my team to know Earthquake, and now I had the power to do so. Then came the rare candies. I thought that grinding up my team at the Elite Four was too repetitive. Now I'm gonna level up in style. Unfortunately, leveling up your Pokemon through rare candies was tedious. Before Gen 5, after you used one rare candy, you would be pushed back to your bag, so you couldn't use a bunch at once. I must have sat for hours of my young life bringing all of my Pokemon up to level 100. And then I noticed that once they got to level 100, I didn't even use them anymore. There wasn't any reason to. It's not like they could get any stronger, but that was okay. Training Pokemon wasn't my favorite part of the game anyway. My favorite part of the game was catching the Pokemon, and that was easy with the Wild Pokemon modifier. No longer would I have to go out of my way to buy those pesky second versions. I could just make any Pokemon I wanted appear in the wild. Actually, I didn't have to go out of my way to get any Pokemon now. Poké Radar, waiting for swarms, exploring the region. Why do any of that nonsense when I could just make whoever I want pop out of any grass patch I so choose? And since I could modify the level too, I could just catch everything at level 100, using one of my 999 Master Balls, of course. Then, once I caught all these Pokemon, I realized I had no reason to use them. They were all level 100. I had a full collection of Pokemon and nothing to do with them. And then came my favorite cheat of them all: make any wild Pokemon shiny. At the time, I had never encountered a shiny. My cousin encountered 2. Lucky jerk. Well, I'll show him. I made everything I wanted shiny. A whole team of shinies, a whole box of shinies, a whole game of shinies. And then, one day, I was playing without the shiny cheat on, and I found an authentic shiny. 1 in 8,000 odds. I felt so lucky, so chosen. I caught it with one of the 954 Master Balls I had left. But in my box, next to all the other shinies, it felt like it didn't even matter. It was just one authentic Pokemon in a box of fakes. And when there's that many fakes around, what's really authentic? It was in that moment that I realized there was nothing left for me as a Pokemon trainer. I had all the legendaries, more shinies than anyone could ask for, and a completed Pokedex. I didn't even use the modifier to individually catch every Pokemon. I just used a cheat code to set my Pokedex to 100%, and Professor Oak congratulated me all the same. I got my special certificate, a star, on my trainer card. I felt like I deceived the professor. I deleted that save file, started anew, but I did something different this time. While Pokémon is one of my favorite game franchises, the games do have some obvious design flaws. In addition to the aforementioned mythical Pokemon problem, the games have issues with making you level grind, not great access to TMs that teach moves, as well as not great access to Pokemon you may want on your team. A lot of great Pokemon just appear too far into the game for you to really enjoy using them, or the version exclusive concept locks you out of using certain Pokemon you may want to use in a given playthrough. So So the next time I used cheats, I hacked in rare candies, duplicated my TMs, and I made use of the wild Pokemon modifier. But this time I gave myself a few ground rules. First off, I had level caps for rare candies. I wasn't allowed to level up my Pokemon past the levels of the next big boss in the game. Also, while I did give myself 99 of each TM, I didn't do that until I received that TM for the first time. So I wouldn't be using crazy moves like Fire Blast or Earthquake before the first badge. Functionally, it wasn't that different from Gen 5 onward where TMs became reusable. And I only made myself catch modified Pokemon that were of a similar strength level to the Pokemon that I could have gotten at that time anyway. For example, in Fire Red, I played through the game so many times with Pidgeot, I wanted to shake it up a little bit, so I allowed myself to catch Hoot Hoot instead. I called this practice responsible cheating. It didn't mess up my game experience, it enhanced it. And I'll admit, I still gave myself a few shinies here and there. It's just not a power I could give up. But I didn't make every Pokemon shiny. 2 on my team, max, maybe 3. And when it came to Pokéballs, well, no more unlimited Master Balls. But I really like Pokéball variety, so I would give myself some of the cooler Pokéballs like Luxury Balls, or in games that had them, the absurdly rare Apricorn Balls, so that my Pokemon could reside in spheres that I liked more. Nowadays, I even use cheat codes to create cool and unique challenges for myself. For example, I recently used a cheat code to give myself Ultra Balls in Pokemon Emerald's Battle Pyramid, so that I could catch Pokemon that were otherwise uncatchable. With a few self-imposed rules, that cheat code created a brand new challenge. A link in the description to my video on that challenge, by the way. I think that most people who use cheat codes in video games use them in the Pokemon series. It was a game that just kinda lent itself to cheating. Like, what could you really do with cheat codes in a Mario game? Jump forever? Can't take damage? Whoop-de-doo. Pokemon is such a vast and customizable game that using cheat codes gave you as the player a lot more control over your Pokemon adventure. If you weren't careful, this could be too much control, and could really ruin the fun of the game. There's nothing enjoyable about making yourself win every battle or catch every Pokemon without fail. I question why some of these cheats even exist. Like, I get it's possible to alter the code to make yourself have a complete Pokédex, but why would you do that? You know you didn't earn it. Cheat codes are best used in Pokemon to supplement some of the things in the game that just weren't properly implemented, such as the fact that there are some Pokemon that are locked away behind a 20-year-old event from a bankrupt toy store. I think playing around with the code of a game to make your experience better is all well and good. Just make sure to practice responsible cheating. One of the biggest strengths of Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver is its abundance of side content. One piece of side content that I think is worth talking about today is the Pokéathlon, a series of mini-games based around athletic competitions where you use your own Pokemon to compete. While the Pokéathlon was an overall well-executed feature, I do think it had a few shortcomings that made it just shy of perfect. Let's take a journey to the Pokéathlon Dome and deconstruct one of Pokemon's most unique pieces of side content. The Pokéathlon consists of 5 courses, which each contain 3 minigames based around one of the 5 Pokéathlon stats. In these minigames, you control 3 Pokémon using the DS stylus and compete against 3 other teams in a series of different challenges. The stats in the Pokéathlon are separate to your stats in regular battles. The 5 Pokéathlon stats are Speed, Power, Stamina, Skill, and Jump. The stats improve certain characteristics of your Pokemon, and certain stats work better with certain minigames. For example, in the brick-breaking minigame, Power is relevant, but Jump is not. 4 out of the 5 stats are self-explanatory in how they affect your Pokemon. The odd one out, I feel, is Skill. The skill stat mostly comes down to how well a Pokemon does a thing. Like, it makes your Pokemon throw snowballs better in the snowball minigame, but it also makes your Pokemon accelerate faster in the hurdle minigame. The The problem with the skill stat is that, other than the event's labeled skill, it's not clear that skill is a helpful stat in a lot of minigames where it is. So players may not choose Pokemon with good skill for certain events that might need it. Raising Pokéathlon stats is also a bit of a bland process. There's no cool training area. Your Pokemon just drink juice that might raise their stats. With the regular stats used in main game battles, you feel like you earn it through participating in battles, and even beyond that, there are a variety of factors that go towards raising stats, like natures, IVs, and EVs. Now, I think EVs are a bad game mechanic, but at least they are an attempt at making stat raising interesting. Raising stats in the Pokéathlon is not interesting. You can get the performance enhancing juice either by just straight up buying it at a low price or making it yourself by blending apricorns. The blending apricorn option, I feel, is not ideal at all. Unlike blending berries for Pokemon contest stats in other games, apricorns are 1. A lot more scarce than berries, and 2. Have another important use. Most players would probably prefer to use them to make rare Pokéballs. If you saw my video on the Moon Ball and the problem with the apricorn balls, link in the description by the way, you would know how few apricorns you can actually get a hold of. And if you're a fan of using the highly exclusive apricorn balls, you're probably not going to want to blend this precious resource for Pokéathlon stats. And if you don't want to use your apricorns, that's okay, because you can buy apricorn juice. The Apri Juice stand does only offer 3 stat raising juices a day that rotate around, so you would only be able to buy for 3 out of the 5 stats at a time. And to make matters worse, stat changes are not permanent. Once a Pokemon is removed from your team, its stats revert to what it was before. This means that if you have a Pokéathlon Pokemon that isn't a battle Pokemon, you would be forced to keep it on your team if you want to keep its Pokéathlon stats. The one positive to this is that if you get a negative outcome from the Apri drink, you can reset the stats and try again. Now, how are these stats distributed? It's absolute madness. The stats seem to have nothing to do with the Pokemon themselves. Like, Slowking has a high jump stat. What? Legendaries have extremely low power stat. Ah yes, the Guardian of the Skies can't break a few bricks. That makes sense. And apparently Sunkern, the at the time lowest base stat total Pokemon, has one of, if not the best stats in all of the Pokéathlon. I'm pretty sure these wacky stats are just a joke by the developers, but honestly it really makes me take the Pokéathlon less seriously, because the stats feel so meaningless now. However, I do like the concept that some Pokemon you probably wouldn't use normally, like Sunkern, do better in the Pokéathlon, which would motivate you to capture one. So that's how Pokéathlon stats work, but now let's talk about the gameplay. The gameplay is the absolute biggest strength of the Pokéathlon. The minigames remind me a lot of Mario Party minigames, or the minigames you'd find in Super Mario 64 DS and New Super Mario Bros. And the fact that you are using your own Pokémon in these minigames makes you feel more of a connection to who you're playing as. Of all the minigames, I would say my favorites would be the hurdles, disc catch, and the one where you push a ball into the goals. The hurdle game challenges you to focus on 3 Pokémon at once by tapping on them to jump over the hurdles. This minigame is funny because it actually kind of punishes you if you bring in Pokemon with all max speed, because since they'd be going at the same speed, they'd reach the hurdles at the same time, and you can't tap all 3 at once. The disc catch minigame challenges you to jump up and grab discs. The further back you are, the more points you get, but the farther back you are, the more likely someone else hit the disc first. And the goal minigame challenges you to push a ball into enemy goals, challenging you to play both offense and defense. Some of the not as good minigames include the snow throw, where you make a snowball and throw it at opponents. This minigame just doesn't feel too good to control. I can't quite put my finger on it, but I just don't really enjoy making the snowball and throwing it. It's just not that satisfying. And then there's this brick breaking minigame that just has you tap the screen over and over to break bricks, which kind of reminds me of button mashers and Mario Party, which are the worst designed minigames minigames of that series. Brick Breakers is a little better than Mario Party Button Mashers because it at least challenges you to pay attention to your Pokemon's stamina and try to switch out while the bricks are resetting to keep momentum. Overall, I don't think any of the minigames are bad, and you'll always be in for an enjoyable experience no matter which course you choose. Some of the minigames repeat between courses. For example, the brick breaking game is in both the strength and stamina courses. The negative element to this is that there are fewer minigames to engage with overall, but it is interesting to approach the same minigame when you prepared Pokemon with different stats. Knowing the brick breaking minigame is in stamina will make you consider a Pokemon that also has a good strength stat. And that brings me to the problem with how the stats affect the minigames. Because the stats play such a big role in how well your Pokemon do in the games, a lot of the time it feels like whether or not you're going to win is decided based on the Pokemon you bring rather than how well you play. To compare it to Mario Party, in that series every character moves at the same speed. They all jump just as high and take up the same amount of space. Since all the players are on an even playing field, skill within the game is the only deciding factor towards victory, unless it's a luck-based game. Or in games like Super Smash Bros., all the characters have different stats, but in theory, are balanced to the point where any character could beat any other character. While some characters did end up being better than others, the intention development-wise was for all the characters to have a fair shot. In the Pokéathlon, some Pokémon are objectively better than others, so you either win with little resistance due to bringing in high-stat Pokémon, or lose miserably because the stats don't measure up. So that's what it's like to play the Pokéathlon. But if you do play it, what sort of prizes do you get? Side content in Pokémon is much more than just how fun it is to play on its own. It's also important to consider how something like the Pokéathlon exists within the context of Pokémon Heart Gold and Soul Silver. Playing the Pokéathlon not only gives you internal achievements, but it can also contribute to the game at large through its prize counter. I am of the opinion that any piece of side content in Pokémon should in some way include a Pokémon as a prize. I said in a previous video on the bug catching contest that what makes that piece of side content so memorable is that you can get team members associated with it, since the bugs you catch can join your team. The Pokéathlon has no Pokémon prizes at all, which is a shame because Tyrogue would have been the perfect candidate. It's a Johto Pokémon, it has athletic theming, and it has 3 unique evolutions. Also, Tyrogue has an absolutely awful method of being obtained in Johto, requiring the player to traverse through Mount Mordor twice, which the player can only do after getting all 16 badges. Tyrogue is literally locked away to the same point in the game as the secret final boss. If Tyrogue were a prize of the Pokéathlon, you would be able to obtain it not too long after badge 3, and have a team member that would remind you of the Pokéathlon experience. But even though the Pokéathlon doesn't give out Pokémon as prizes, its prizes are still pretty decent. Beyond some minor healing items and rare candies and such, you could pick up some extra apricorns and even some decently rare evolution items here. The items switch out every day of the week, so sometimes it can be a pain if you're doing a playthrough and can't access the evolution item you need on a particular day. I remember as a kid I was on a big road trip and I really wanted to evolve my Scyther, but unfortunately, I couldn't get the metal coat because it wasn't the correct day. And because I was in a place where I was playing the game for such a long time, I beat half the game with a Scyther that should have been a Scizor. Let me know in the comments if you relate to my woes. The items are bought with special points earned by competing in the Pokéathlon. The amount of points you get correlates to how many points you scored within the rounds, plus an extra 100 if you win. But beyond it being a fun piece of side content that you may be motivated to play to get a certain evolution item, the Pokéathlon doesn't have that much of a presence within Heart Gold and Soul Silver, or the series as a whole. It was probably added late in development in order to advertise a fun little side mode that uses the DS stylus, something a lot of games from this time period did. I wouldn't call the Pokéathlon an afterthought, as it definitely had a lot of heart and soul, no pun intended, put into it, but its relatively small pool of minigames unintentionally intuitive stat system and just okay prizes don't motivate me to revisit the Pokéathlon in subsequent playthroughs. Which is a shame, because I don't think Pokemon games would ever do something like this again. Beyond Nintendo not doing touchscreen-focused games anymore, the Pokéathlon is just so classic pixel art Pokemon magic. I don't really see them making anything like this with 3D models, as it just wouldn't work. Unlike Pokemon contests that got a few updates after their original iteration in Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire, the Pokéathlon was one and done. Which is too bad, because I thought it had potential to be a staple of the Pokemon series. But what do you think of the Pokéathlon? Did you enjoy it? Did this video make you want to revisit it? Let me know in the comments below. Hey, if you like this Pokemon video, you should check out my other channel that covers TV shows. I just put out a video on the Pokemon anime and why Ash lost his first Pokemon League battle. You should really check it out. If you like what I do and want to see me do more of it, consider becoming a channel member or supporting my Patreon. Link in the description. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time.